Hello, friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did. Also, don't forget to press the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. From which country or city do you follow the channel? The first thing I tell people when they ask about my job is that it's not glamorous, not even remotely. It's mostly filled with long hours in dark, isolated places, hunting things that shouldn't exist but do. My name is Luke Brenton, and I'm part of a secret unit funded by the U.S. government, tasked with hunting down cryptids, those elusive, often terrifying creatures whispered about in local legends. Think Bigfoot or the Chupacabra, but worse. They pay us well, not for the danger itself, but for the secrecy. No one can know these things are real, not the public, not the media. The government prefers the status quo. Monsters belong in fairy tales. The call came on a Tuesday evening. I was in my apartment in Arlington, Virginia, staring at the ceiling as rain hammered against the windows. Director Wilson's name flashed on my phone screen. "Brenton," I answered. "We've got a situation in Kentucky, Appalachian region, small town called Hazard." Wilson's voice was clinical, detached. It always was when he delivered assignments. 7 hikers gone missing in the last month. Then a search party of 5 locals disappeared 3 days ago. Local authorities are getting desperate. I sat up, already reaching for the notepad on my nightstand. Any evidence? Tracks, remains, witness accounts? Partial footprints, unlike anything local wildlife would leave. Fabric scraps found high in trees, and one witness, a local hunter who claims he saw something pale and wrong moving through the forest at dusk. The man hasn't spoken a word since his interview with local police. I jotted down the details. I'll need the standard kit and a partner for this one. Weiss is already prepped. He'll meet you at Andrews Air Force Base at 0600 tomorrow. The usual cover: wildlife specialists investigating potential disease outbreak affecting local fauna. Got it. Wilson paused, something unusual in his typically efficient briefings. "Brenton, whatever's out there, it's escalating. People are noticing. We need this handled quickly and quietly." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at my phone for a moment, then began packing. Morning came with dreary efficiency. The military transport that carried me to Kentucky was cold and uncomfortable, but I'd learned to sleep almost anywhere. Jackson Weiss was waiting when we landed, his tall frame leaning against a nondescript black SUV. "Brenton," he nodded, offering a firm handshake. "Been a while." 8 months, I replied, tossing my gear in the back. "That business in Oregon?" Weiss grimaced. "Don't remind me. Still can't look at caves the same way." We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that comes from shared trauma. Weiss was ex-military, special forces, recruited into our unit 5 years before me. His weathered face carried a deep scar from his right eyebrow to his jaw, a souvenir from a particularly nasty hunt in Montana. I'd never asked about it, and he'd never volunteered the story. "Read the file?" he asked eventually, eyes fixed on the winding Appalachian road ahead. Most of it, 7 hikers, 5 search party members, all gone without a trace. I flipped through the folder Wilson had provided. Local authorities reported unusual weather patterns in the area too. Sudden temperature drops, unexplained mist. "Classic signs," Weiss muttered. "You think it's another skinwalker variant?" I studied the photos of the missing persons. Young, old, male, female. No discernible pattern. Too indiscriminate for a skinwalker. They usually fixate on a type. This feels hungrier, less methodical. The landscape changed as we drove deeper into Kentucky. The cities gave way to small towns, then to scattered rural homes, and finally to nothing but dense forest and mountains. Hazard appeared suddenly, nestled between 2 imposing ridges, like it was being slowly squeezed by the wilderness around it. It was nearly midnight when we rolled into town. The main street was deserted, street lamps casting weak yellow pools on empty sidewalks. Store windows were dark, some boarded up entirely. A single bar showed signs of life, but even there, the patrons were few and subdued. "Feels like a town under siege," Weiss observed, slowing the SUV to a crawl. He wasn't wrong. There was a palpable tension in the air, like the whole town was collectively holding its breath. We checked into the only motel, a dreary establishment called the Pinewood Inn. The night clerk barely looked up as he handed over our keys, his eyes darting nervously to the windows as if expecting something to press against the glass. Our rooms were adjacent, with a connecting door that we immediately unlocked. Old habits. You never knew when you might need to reach your partner quickly in our line of work. I unpacked methodically, arranging my equipment with practiced precision. Standard issue firearm, a Sig Sauer P226 with custom silver alloy rounds, a hunting knife with a handle made from compressed wood ash, UV flashlights, motion sensors, medical kit, the tools of our unique trade. Weiss knocked on the connecting door. Local sheriff knows we're coming, meeting him at 0800 tomorrow at the edge of the forest where the search party was last seen. I nodded, checking my phone. No signal, of course. These remote locations were always the same, cut off, isolated, perfect hunting grounds for the things we pursued. Get some rest, Weiss suggested. Tomorrow's going to be long. As I lay in the lumpy motel bed, listening to the strange creaks and settling sounds of the unfamiliar building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, not by anything human, but by the forest itself, like it was aware of our arrival and was already calculating how to add us to its growing list of victims. Outside, the wind picked up, branches scraping against the window like skeletal fingers seeking entry. In the distance, something howled, too deep for a wolf, too mournful for any natural creature. Tomorrow, we would enter those woods, and whatever was waiting there would be ready for us. The morning brought no comfort. A thick fog had settled over Hazard, reducing visibility to mere yards and lending an otherworldly quality to the already tense atmosphere. Weiss and I ate breakfast at the only diner in town, where locals stared at us with a mixture of suspicion and desperate hope. "You the government men?" asked our waitress, a woman in her 50s with deep lines etched around her eyes. Her name tag read Betty. "Wildlife specialists," Weiss answered smoothly. "Here to investigate some unusual animal behavior." Betty's hand trembled slightly as she refilled our coffee cups. "It ain't no animal," she whispered. "Animals don't take people like that. Animals don't make folks afraid to open their windows at night." I leaned forward. "Have you seen anything unusual yourself, ma'am?" She glanced around nervously, then bent closer. 3 nights ago, I was closing up here, saw something moving across the road toward the forest. It was tall, taller than any man I ever saw. Walked all wrong, like its joints weren't put together right. She straightened suddenly, as if remembering herself. "But you didn't hear that from me. People around here don't talk about it. Bad luck." Sheriff Dean Green met us at the forest edge as planned. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, but with the haunted look of a man who'd aged a decade in a matter of weeks. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his uniform hung loosely on his frame, suggesting recent weight loss. "Figured they'd send someone eventually," he said by way of greeting, not bothering with handshakes. "Though I expected more of you." "We're just the advance team," I lied. "Assessment only." Green snorted. "Sure. Well, I hope you boys are better prepared than you look." He gestured toward the dense tree line. "The search party went in right here, following the trail of the missing hikers. They had radios, supplies, weapons, all experienced outdoorsmen. They reported back hourly until about 3 p.m., then nothing." "Did they report anything unusual before they went silent?" Weiss asked, already scanning the forest edge. Green hesitated. "Last transmission was garbled. Something about the trees moving when there wasn't any wind. Then one of them, Jim Hollis, been hunting these woods since he was 10. He started screaming about faces in the bark. Then static." I exchanged a glance with Weiss. Hallucinations often preceded encounters with certain types of cryptids that emitted psychoactive compounds as a hunting mechanism. "You have a map of the area?" I asked. Green produced a topographical map from his vehicle, spreading it across the hood. "They were here when they went dark," he said, pointing to a spot about 3 miles in. "There's a small clearing near a rock formation locals call the Widow's Teeth. Beyond that, the forest gets thicker, older. Folks don't typically go that far in." "Any local legends about the area?" Weiss inquired casually. Old stories, warnings passed down? The sheriff's face hardened. My grandmother used to talk about something in those woods. The miners had stories too, back when the coal industry was booming here. They'd speak of men going missing from camps, of something that would imitate human voices to lure people deeper into the trees. He folded the map abruptly. But those are just stories. I could tell from his expression that he no longer believed they were just stories. We geared up methodically, checking our weapons and equipment. I activated a small GPS locator and provided Green with the receiving unit. If we don't report back by nightfall, don't send anyone else in. Call this number instead. I handed him a card with Director Wilson's direct line. Green studied the card, then tucked it into his pocket. You know what's out there, don't you? We have theories, Weiss answered, non-committally. The sheriff looked between us, then at the waiting forest. Good luck, he said finally. You're gonna need it. The transition from open air to forest was immediate and disorienting. The fog seemed thicker beneath the canopy, swirling between tree trunks in unnatural patterns. Sound behaved strangely, too. Some noises muffled, others amplified. Our footsteps were oddly loud, while birdsong seemed distant and warped. Notice anything? Weiss murmured after we'd been walking for about 20 minutes. I nodded. No wildlife, no squirrels, no deer signs. The forest felt abandoned, as if the natural inhabitants had fled. We followed the search party's trail, which was surprisingly easy to track. Broken branches, footprints, occasional equipment, a water bottle, a torn backpack, mapped their progress. Too easy, perhaps, like something wanted us to follow. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead, until barely any light penetrated. The fog took on a yellowish tinge, carrying a subtle scent I couldn't quite place. Something like wet soil mixed with copper and decay. 2 hours in, we found the first body. It was wedged between two trees, arms and legs twisted at impossible angles, as if the person had been forcibly stuffed into the space. The face was contorted in an expression of pure terror, eyes wide and mouth stretched in a silent scream. But what disturbed me most was the lack of blood. The body showed signs of massive trauma, crushed ribs, shattered limbs, yet there was no blood anywhere. It's been drained, Weiss observed clinically, examining the corpse's ashen skin. Completely. I checked the man's identification. Roy Mercer, 42, part of the search party. I photographed the scene, noting the strange marking on the bark near the body, a series of deep gouges that formed no recognizable pattern but seemed deliberate. Look at this, Weiss called from a few yards away. He stood before another tree, this one with a large misshapen knot in its trunk. Does this look like a natural formation to you? I approached cautiously. The knot bulged outward, its surface smooth and oddly moist. As I drew closer, I realized with a shock that it resembled a human face, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, as if caught mid-breath. Don't touch it, I warned, just as Weiss extended his hand toward the formation. Wasn't planning to, he replied grimly, but I think I know what we're dealing with. Before he could elaborate, a sound echoed through the trees, a distant, plaintive call that might have been human, might have been something else entirely. Help! Please, anyone! We froze, weapons raised. The voice came again, closer this time, from a different direction. Help me, I'm hurt. It's mimicking, Weiss whispered. Classic lure technique. I nodded, throat tight. We'd encountered mimics before, but something about this voice raised the hairs on my neck. It sounded too perfect, too human. Like it wasn't just imitating words, but understanding the emotion behind them. We pressed forward, more cautious now, moving from tree to tree for cover. The fog thickened until visibility dropped to less than 10 feet. Strange shapes loomed and receded in the mist, some tree-like, others more fluid, more wrong. The clearing with the widow's teeth appeared suddenly, the fog parting just enough to reveal a cluster of jagged rock formations jutting from the ground like enormous fangs. And strewn across the clearing, in a display so horrific it momentarily stopped my breath, were the remains of the rest of the search party. They had been dismembered, limbs arranged in a crude circular pattern around a central point. torsos stacked one atop another like macabre building blocks. But most disturbing were the heads, each mounted on a crude spike fashioned from a branch, eyes removed, mouths stuffed with what appeared to be moss and small stones. Jesus, Weiss breathed, forgetting protocol in the face of such deliberate savagery. I scanned the clearing, weapon ready. This isn't random predation, this is ritual. In the center of the circle, something dark and viscous pooled on the ground, bubbling slightly as if heated from below. The soil around it was discolored, stretched and warped like melting plastic. Weiss crouched at the edge of the circle, careful not to step inside. This isn't just about feeding, he said quietly. It's marking territory, sending a message. To what? Other predators? To us? Weiss stood, his expression grim. It knows we're here. As if summoned by his words, the fog behind us shifted, parting slightly to reveal a shape moving among the trees. Tall, unnaturally thin, its movements jerky and disjointed, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. It paused, and though I couldn't make out details in the mist, I felt its attention focus on us with predatory intensity. Don't run, Weiss murmured, slowly raising his weapon. Running triggers the chase response. I nodded, my own gun trained on the shadowy figure. On 3? But before Weiss could respond, the shape melted back into the fog, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. The forest fell silent. Not even the wind disturbed the leaves. The stillness was absolute, suffocating. Then, from directly above us came the sound of wood creaking, branches straining. We looked up simultaneously. The thing was in the trees, its pale body wrapped around a massive branch like some grotesque serpent, watching us with eyes that reflected the dim light like pools of oil. And it was smiling. I fired first, the shot deafeningly loud in the quiet forest. The creature jerked as the bullet hit, but made no sound. Instead, it unwound from the branch with fluid grace that belied its earlier awkward movements, dropping to the ground just yards from where we stood. Up close, it was even more wrong. Its body was humanoid but stretched, limbs too long and too thin, joints bending in directions they shouldn't. The skin was not skin at all, but something like bark or hide, pale and mottled with darker patches that shifted and swirled as if alive. The face was the worst part, almost human, with features that seemed to slide and resettle as I watched, never quite settling into a fixed arrangement. Weiss fired twice, both shots hitting the creature's torso. Black fluid oozed from the wounds, but the thing showed no sign of pain or distress. Instead, it cocked its head, studying us with what looked disturbingly like curiosity. Run, it said suddenly, the word perfectly formed but hollow, as if spoken into an empty metal container. Run, 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 run. The voice was wrong, not a single voice at all, but a layered chorus of different tones and pitches, like multiple people speaking in unison. It's learned language, Weiss said, his own voice tight with controlled fear. That's rare. The creature's head snapped toward him, neck extending unnaturally. Rawr, it repeated, drawing out the vowel until the word became a low, wet gurgle. I took aim again, targeting what I hoped was a vital area. Back away slowly, I instructed Weiss, toward the rocks. We began to retreat, weapons trained on the creature, which watched our movement with predatory focus. It followed, matching our pace exactly, maintaining the same distance between us. It's hurting us, Weiss realized aloud. As he spoke, I became aware of movement in my peripheral vision, more shapes emerging from the fog, similar to the first but smaller, moving with the same unsettling, jerky gait. 3, 4, 5 of them, approaching from different angles, cutting off potential escape routes. They're coordinating, I said grimly. Pack hunters. The largest creature, the one we'd first encountered, made a sound like branches breaking, its mouth stretching impossibly wide to reveal rows of teeth. Not sharp like a predator's, but flat and ridged like grinding stones. It stepped forward, and the others froze, awaiting some signal. I remembered my training. Cryptid packs often had hierarchies with dominant individuals directing the hunt. Take out the leader, and the others might scatter. In one fluid motion, I switched my aim to the creature's head and fired 3 rapid shots. 2 hit their mark, punching through what should have been the brain case. The creature staggered, but didn't fall. Instead, it made that terrible branch-breaking sound again, louder this time. All around us, the forest seemed to respond. Trees creaking, the ground vibrating slightly beneath our feet. The smaller creatures began to close in, moving with newfound urgency. "The rocks!" Weiss shouted, already backing toward the Widow's Teeth formation. "We need higher ground!" We retreated quickly, firing controlled bursts to keep the creatures at bay. They were wary of the weapons, but not frightened, testing our defenses, looking for weaknesses. We reached the rock formation and climbed, the rough stone providing decent handholds. The creatures watched, but didn't immediately follow, circling the base instead. From our elevated position, we had a better view of what we were facing. The smaller ones numbered 7 in total, each slightly different from the others. Some more humanoid, some more animal-like, all sharing that same disturbing quality of wrongness. The leader remained slightly apart, still watching us with that unnervingly intelligent gaze. "What do you make of them?" Weiss asked, reloading his weapon. I studied the creature's behavior, their strange, shifting forms. Some kind of mimic, obviously, but more evolved than anything we've encountered before. They're showing pack tactics, language acquisition, tool use. I nodded toward one of the smaller ones, which was probing the rock face with what looked like a sharpened branch. "The question is, are they native or invasive?" Weiss mused. It was a good question. Some cryptids had evolved alongside humans, adapting to hunt us specifically. Others were intrusions from elsewhere, places our science hadn't classified yet. The leader creature suddenly went still, its head tilted as if listening. The others immediately mimicked the posture, creating an eerie tableau of identical, unnatural stillness. Then, without warning, they melted back into the fog, disappearing so completely it was as if they'd never been there at all. "What just happened?" Weiss whispered. I scanned the forest edge, uneasy. "They're not retreating. They're regrouping." As if to confirm my assessment, a distant howl echoed through the trees, the same too deep, too mournful sound I'd heard from the motel the night before. It was answered by similar calls from different directions, suggesting the pack was spreading out, encircling us. "They're more intelligent than we thought," I said grimly. "They're using strategy." Weiss checked his ammunition. "We need to even the odds, draw them into terrain that favors us." I nodded toward the deeper forest. "The reports mentioned a cave system near here. Restricted movement corridors, potential choke points. Caves mean limited escape routes," Weiss warned. "True, but it also means they can only come at us from one direction." I calculated the risks. It's our best option. We descended carefully from the rocks, weapons ready, senses straining for any sign of the creatures. The fog had thinned slightly, offering better visibility. But that was small comfort. The creatures had proven they could appear and disappear at will. We moved quickly but cautiously, following the map toward where the cave system should be. The forest grew denser, the trees older and larger, their massive roots creating natural barriers and trenches. Perfect ambush territory. "Listen," Weiss said, suddenly stopping short. At first I heard nothing. Then I caught it. A rhythmic sound, like liquid dripping onto hollow wood. It came from everywhere and nowhere, impossible to pinpoint. "They're paralleling us," I whispered, staying just out of sight. As we pressed forward, signs of the creature's presence became more obvious. Strange markings carved into tree trunks, small animal carcasses arranged in geometric patterns. More of those disturbing face-like knots in the bark, each one more defined than the last, some with recognizable human features. "They're changing the forest," Weiss observed, his voice tight. "Remaking it." I'd seen similar behavior in other cryptids, territory marking taken to an extreme, where the creature physically alters its environment to suit its nature, but never on this scale. The cave entrance appeared ahead, a dark mouth in a hillside partially concealed by hanging vines. As we approached, I noticed unusual formations around the opening, rocks and branches arranged in patterns too regular to be natural, creating a kind of crude doorway. "They've been using this place," I realized aloud. Weiss nodded grimly. "Home territory, risky." "No choice now," I replied, checking the UV flashlight attached to my weapon. "They know we're here." As if in response to my words, A chorus of those hollow, branch-breaking calls erupted from the forest behind us. Closer now, urgent. "They're coming," Weiss said, unnecessarily. We entered the cave, flashlights cutting through the gloom. The passage narrowed quickly, forcing us to proceed single file. The walls were wet, glistening with some viscous substance that wasn't quite water. It smelled like decay and something else, something chemical and sharp. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and we stopped short at the sight that greeted us. The walls were covered in what looked like cocoons, translucent membranous sacs attached to the rock face. Inside each one, a human shape was visible, suspended in liquid, features blurred but recognizable as the missing hikers. "Are they alive?" Weiss whispered, moving closer to examine the nearest cocoon. I played my light over the form inside. No movement, no sign of respiration. "I don't think so. Not anymore." The cocoons weren't random. They were arranged in concentric circles around a central point where the cave floor dropped away into a pit. The edge of the pit was lined with those same strange markings we'd seen on the trees outside. "It's a nest," I said, the realization turning my blood cold. "Or a hatchery." Weiss stepped closer to the pit, shining his light down. "Brenton, you need to see this." At the bottom of the pit, perhaps 15 feet down, lay a mass of writhing, pale forms, miniature versions of the creatures we'd encountered, crawling over each other in a seething pile, dozens of them, each about the size of a human infant. "They're breeding," Weiss said, his voice steady despite the horror of what we were witnessing. The implications were staggering. If these things could reproduce at this rate, using human hosts as some kind of incubation mechanism, the threat was far greater than we'd anticipated. "We need to destroy this place," I said firmly. "All of it." Weiss was already reaching for the incendiary charges in his pack when a sound from the tunnel made us both turn. The leader creature stood in the entrance, its body contorted to fit through the narrow opening. Those shifting, never quite settled features focused on us with unmistakable intent. Behind it, more shapes crowded the tunnel, the entire pack, driven by some instinct to protect their young. "Intruders," the leader said in that layered, chorus-like voice. "Threat. Danger." Each word was precisely articulated but emotionless, like it was testing language it had only recently acquired. "Set the charges," I told Weiss, raising my weapon. "I'll hold them off." The leader creature took a step forward, its limbs bending at impossible angles to navigate the uneven cave floor. "You kill us," it said, those oil-slick eyes fixed on my face. "We kill you. Fair." The word choice sent a chill through me. This wasn't just mimicry. It understood concepts, ideas. How long had it been watching humans, learning from us? "What are you?" I asked, curiosity momentarily overriding caution. The creature's face rippled, features rearranging into something that might have been a smile on a human face but was deeply wrong on its alien visage. "We are becoming," it answered, and lunged. I fired instinctively, the muzzle flash illuminating the creature's twisted form in stark relief. The bullets found their mark, punching through its pale, bark-like skin, but the creature barely slowed. It crossed the distance between us with unnatural speed, one elongated arm sweeping toward my head with devastating force. I ducked, the blow grazing my shoulder instead of my skull, but even that glancing contact sent me sprawling. Pain exploded across my upper body, the limb instantly numb. The creature loomed over me, that terrible, almost smile widening to reveal more of those flat, grinding teeth. Behind it, the rest of the pack began to pour into the chamber, their bodies twisting and contorting to fit through the narrow entrance. Some crawled along the ceiling, defying gravity in a way no natural being could. "Weiss!" I shouted, scrambling backward, trying to put distance between myself and the leader. Weiss had positioned himself near the pit, incendiary charges ready. "On it!" he called back, voice tight with concentration. The leader creature cocked its head, those oil-slick eyes shifting from me to Weiss, understanding dawning in its inhuman gaze. It made a high, keening sound that sent the smaller creatures into a frenzy. They swarmed toward Weiss, moving in perfect coordination. I fired again, aiming for the leader's limbs, trying to slow it down. The creature jerked as bullets tore through its extremities, black fluid spattering the cave floor. But it kept coming, moving differently now, lower to the ground, more animal than human in its gait. Weiss was holding his own, his larger frame and military training serving him well as he fended off the smaller creatures with controlled bursts of gunfire. But there were too many, coming too fast. One latched onto his leg, mouth opening impossibly wide to reveal those grinding teeth. Weiss cried out in pain but didn't falter, kicking the thing away with enough force to send it crashing against the far wall. The leader was on me again, moving faster than something its size should be able to, its limbs elongating and contracting in nauseating ways that defied anatomy. I switched tactics, dropping my gun and drawing the hunting knife from my belt. The silver alloy blade gleamed in the harsh light of our flashlights. The creature paused, its gaze fixed on the knife. Something like recognition flashed across its ever-shifting features. "You know what this is," I realized aloud. "You've seen it before." The thing made a low, rumbling sound, deep in what passed for its chest. "Old weapon," it said, those chorus-like voices overlapping in dissonant harmony. "Memory and skin." I didn't have time to process the implications of that statement. The creature lunged again, but this time I was ready. I sidestepped, driving the knife into what should have been its shoulder. The blade sank deep, meeting less resistance than I expected, as if the thing's interior was partly hollow. The creature shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and black fluid gushed from the wound. It thrashed, trying to dislodge the blade, its limbs whipping around with bone-breaking force. I held on, using the knife as an anchor, and drove my other fist into what passed for the thing's face. Across the chamber, Weiss had managed to place several charges around the pit's edge. He was bleeding from multiple wounds, his uniform torn, but his movements were still precise, professional. He caught my eye and nodded, the signal that he was ready. I twisted the knife deeper into the leader creature's body, eliciting another of those metal-tearing shrieks. The sound seemed to disorient the smaller creatures, making them hesitate in their attack. I used the moment to disengage, yanking the knife free and rolling away from the leader's reach. "Now!" I shouted to Weiss. Weiss hit the detonator. The first charge exploded with a concussive blast that shook the entire chamber, sending rocks and dust cascading from the ceiling. The creatures screeched in unison, the sound painful to human ears. The second and third charges followed in quick succession, their explosions directed downward into the pit. The floor beneath us began to crack, fissures spreading outward from the pit like a spider web. The creatures panicked, abandoning their coordinated attack in favor of self-preservation, scrambling toward the exit tunnel. The leader remained, however, its oil-slick eyes fixed on me with what looked disturbingly like hatred, a human emotion on an inhuman face. "Not end," it said, its layered voice somehow audible over the rumble of collapsing rock. "Never end. We are many. We are becoming." The fourth charge detonated, and this time the floor gave way entirely. The pit widened, swallowing cocoons and creatures alike. The leader stood at the edge, perfectly balanced despite the destruction around it. For a moment I thought it would leap for me, continue the fight despite everything. Instead, it did something far more disturbing. It smiled, a genuine smile, not the grotesque approximation from before, and spoke one final time. "See you again, Luke Brenton." Then it stepped backward into the widening pit, disappearing into the darkness below. "Move!" Weiss shouted, grabbing my arm. "This whole place is coming down." We ran for the exit tunnel, dodging falling debris and the few remaining smaller creatures that blocked our path. The tunnel itself was beginning to collapse, the walls squeezing inward as the mountain above shifted. We pushed forward, lungs burning, muscles screaming, the rumble of destruction following close behind. We burst from the cave entrance just as it collapsed completely, a cloud of dust and pulverized rock billowing out behind us. The force of the implosion knocked us forward, sending us tumbling down the hillside in a tangle of limbs and equipment. When we finally stopped rolling, I lay on my back, staring up at the forest canopy, every part of me aching. Beside me, Weiss coughed violently, trying to clear the dust from his lungs. "Did we get them all?" he managed between coughs. I sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in my shoulder where the creature had struck me. The entire hillside had changed shape, the cave entrance now nothing more than a pile of rubble. Smoke rose from cracks in the earth, carrying that same strange, chemical smell. "The nest is destroyed," I said, not quite answering his question. I couldn't shake the memory of the leader's final words, the way it had spoken my name with such familiarity. Weiss struggled to his feet, offering me a hand up. "We should call in the cleanup team. They'll want to quarantine this whole area." I nodded, retrieving my satellite phone from my pack, which had somehow survived our headlong flight from the cave. The call was brief, just the code word that would bring in the specialized team to contain the site and eliminate any evidence of what had happened here. As I put the phone away, Weiss was scanning the forest, his expression troubled. "Something's not right," he said quietly. I followed his gaze. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just trees and undergrowth, the late afternoon light filtering through the canopy. Then I noticed it. The silence. No birds, no insects, not even the rustling of leaves in the wind. The forest was completely, unnaturally still. "They're watching us," Weiss said, giving voice to my own thoughts. I remembered what the creature had said. "We are many." How many more were out there, hidden in the woods, observing us with those oil-slick eyes? And what had it meant by "we are becoming"? "We need to get back to town," I said, checking the position of the sun to orient myself. "Before dark." We moved quickly but cautiously, aware that we were likely being followed, observed. The forest seemed different on the return journey, the trees closer together than I remembered, the paths less distinct. More than once I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, only to find nothing when I turned to look directly. The sun was setting by the time we reached the forest edge, bathing everything in blood-red light that did nothing to ease the sense of wrongness that had settled into my bones. Sheriff Green was waiting where we'd left him, pacing nervously beside his vehicle. His face registered shock when he saw our condition. Clothes torn and filthy, covered in dust, and what was probably the creature's black fluid. Both of us sporting various cuts and bruises. "What the hell happened in there?" he demanded as we approached. "Situation contained," Weiss replied tersely. "For now." Green looked past us toward the forest, his expression darkening. "For now? What does that mean?" I was about to respond when movement caught my eye, a flicker of pale, bark-like skin between distant trees. There and gone so quickly, I might have imagined it. "It means we're not done here," I said grimly, "but we've bought some time." As we drove back to town in silence, I couldn't shake the leader creature's final words from my mind. "See you again, Luke Brenton." It had known my name. Somehow, it had known who I was. And I had the terrible feeling it had let me live on purpose. The cleanup team arrived before midnight, 4 nondescript black vans carrying men and women in hazmat suits, their faces hidden behind respirators, their movements efficient and practiced. They spoke little, asking only the essential questions about what we'd encountered and where. I provided GPS coordinates for the cave site and the clearing with the widow's teeth, marking them on their specialized maps. "Full containment protocol," I instructed the team leader, a stoic woman who identified herself only as Miller. "Nothing gets out, nothing gets studied in the field. Everything goes back to the facility." Miller nodded, her expression unreadable behind her mask. "Locals?" "Sheriff knows enough to be cautious. The rest of the town suspects something but has no specifics." I hesitated, then added, "You might want to check the trees for those face-like formations. They seem to be part of how these things spread." "Noted," Miller replied. "We'll handle it from here. Director Wilson wants you and Weiss back at headquarters for debriefing ASAP." Weiss, who had been silent since our return to town, finally spoke up. "These aren't like anything we've encountered before, Miller. They're intelligent, adaptive, and they learn fast." Miller's eyes narrowed slightly, the only visible reaction through her mask. "Just do your job, Weiss. We'll do ours." The cleanup team departed immediately for the forest, their vehicles moving in silent procession through Hazard's empty streets. Locals watched from behind curtains, their faces pale and frightened. But no one approached, no one asked questions. They'd learned the value of silence. Weiss and I checked out of the Pinewood Inn, gathering our few belongings. The night clerk avoided eye contact, sliding our receipt across the counter with trembling hands. Word had spread, it seemed. Not of what we'd found, but that we'd found something. Do you think it's over?" the clerk asked suddenly as we turned to leave, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked back at him, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the pallor of sleepless nights. "Stay out of the woods," I said simply. "All of you, at least for a while." He nodded, his gaze dropping back to the counter. "Some things aren't meant to be disturbed," he murmured, almost to himself. Outside, the night was cool and clear, stars visible above the small town in a way they never were in cities. Our car was waiting, fueled and ready for the drive to the airfield where a transport would take us back to headquarters. As we loaded our gear, I scanned the tree line visible at the edge of town. Nothing moved there, but the feeling of being watched persisted. "You've been quiet," I observed, as Weiss slid into the driver's seat. He started the engine before responding. "It knew your name, Brenton. It spoke directly to you." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. In all my years doing this job, I've never seen a cryptid do that. I hadn't either, and the implications disturbed me more than I wanted to admit. Maybe it heard the sheriff use my name. Mimics pick up language quickly. Weiss shook his head. This wasn't mimicry. This was recognition. He pulled onto the main road, the headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. And what it said, "We are becoming." Becoming what? I had no answer for him. The drive to the airfield passed in contemplative silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts, processing what we'd witnessed in those woods. The military transport that awaited us was identical to the one that had brought us here, cold, uncomfortable, and mercifully anonymous. As we settled in for the flight, exhaustion finally caught up with me. I closed my eyes, but sleep brought no refuge. I dreamed of trees with faces, of pale, twisted forms moving just at the edge of vision, of oil-slick eyes watching me with terrible intelligence. And throughout the dream, a chorus of layered voices whispered a single phrase over and over: "We are becoming." I woke with a start as the plane touched down at Andrews Air Force Base. Dawn was breaking, casting everything in gray half-light that did little to dispel the lingering unease from my dreams. Weiss looked equally unrested, his normally alert gaze dulled by fatigue, and something else, doubt, perhaps, or worry. A car was waiting to take us directly to headquarters, a nondescript office building in Arlington that housed our unit's operations. The lobby was empty at this early hour, our footsteps echoing on polished marble as we made our way to the elevators. Biometric scanners granted us access to the lower levels, where the real work happened. Director Wilson was waiting in the debriefing room, his tall, thin frame silhouetted against the window that overlooked an interior courtyard. He turned as we entered, his expression giving away nothing. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chairs arranged around a conference table. We complied, the action bringing fresh awareness of every bruise and strain from the previous day's encounter. Wilson remained standing, studying us with clinical detachment. "Your preliminary report makes for interesting reading," he said finally. "Intelligent mimics with pack behavior and advanced language acquisition." He paused, tapping a folder on the table. "And they knew your name, Agent Brenton." I wasn't surprised that this detail had caught his attention. "Yes, sir." The leader creature addressed me directly before the cave collapsed. Wilson's gaze sharpened. "And you believe it survived?" It wasn't a question. "I believe some of them survived, yes." The leader seemed confident, even as everything was being destroyed around it. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. "The cleanup team has established a perimeter around the affected area. Initial surveys show significant alteration of the local ecosystem, those face formations on trees extending for nearly a mile in all directions from the cave site." He sat down heavily, suddenly looking tired. "We've seen territorial marking before, but nothing on this scale." "Sir," Weiss interjected, "what the lead creature said, 'We are becoming,' suggests these things are in some state of transition or evolution. If they're changing, adapting this quickly." He didn't need to finish the thought. We all understood the implications. A cryptid species with this level of intelligence and adaptability, capable of using humans as hosts for reproduction, represented a threat beyond anything we'd previously classified. "We've increased surveillance in the region," Wilson said after a moment. "Satellite monitoring, remote sensors. If these things try to expand their territory again, we'll know." He fixed me with a penetrating stare. But I want your assessment, Brenton. Off the record. What are we dealing with here? I considered my answer carefully. Something old, I think. The leader recognized the silver alloy knife, called it an old weapon. It spoke of memory in skin, which suggests some form of genetic or inherited knowledge. I leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. But also something new. The way it was changing the forest, the coordinated pack behavior, the language acquisition, these feel like recent adaptations, accelerated evolution. Or deliberate change, Weiss added quietly. Wilson's eyebrows rose. Deliberate? You think these creatures are consciously directing their own evolution? I think, Weiss said carefully, that we shouldn't underestimate their intelligence or their intentions. They're not just predators. They're transforming their environment, creating a habitat that suits them. And they're using us somehow, not just as food, but as part of whatever they're becoming. Silence fell over the room as we all absorbed this unsettling possibility. Finally, Wilson sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Get yourselves to medical, he instructed. Full workup, decontamination protocols. I want you both cleared before you leave this building. He stood, signaling the end of the debriefing. And Brenton? He paused, his expression softening slightly. Be careful, if this thing has fixated on you for some reason. I understand, sir, I replied, though in truth I wasn't sure I did. Why had the creature singled me out? What had it seen in me that had prompted that final, disturbing farewell? Medical took hours. Blood tests, tissue samples, brain scans, the works. The doctors were thorough, searching for any sign of contamination or alteration. Weiss finished before me and was cleared to leave, though he waited in the hallway, unwilling to depart until he knew I was clean too. All clear, the lead physician finally announced, reviewing my test results one last time. No signs of foreign biological material or psychoactive compounds. You're lucky, Agent Brenton. Most encounters this close leave some trace. I wasn't sure luck had anything to do with it, but I nodded and thanked her, gathering my belongings and joining Weiss in the corridor. Clean bill of health? He asked as we walked toward the exit. Apparently, I confirmed, though I couldn't shake the feeling that the medical tests had missed something subtle, something that couldn't be detected by our current technology. Outside, the day had fully arrived. Bright sunshine, a stark contrast to the dark thoughts that had followed us from Kentucky. Weiss paused at the building entrance, turning to face me. What now? He asked, the question encompassing more than just our immediate plans. I shrugged. Now we wait. For the next assignment, the next hunt. For the creature to fulfill its promise and find me again, I didn't add. Weiss studied me for a moment, then nodded. I'll see you around, Brenton. Try to get some real sleep. We parted ways there, each returning to our separate lives, our separate apartments, where we would try to process what we'd seen, what we'd learned. But as I walked toward the parking lot, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. I turned, scanning the area, but saw nothing unusual, just government workers going about their business, cars passing on the street, trees swaying gently in the breeze. Trees. I found myself staring at them, searching for faces in the bark, for any sign of that unnatural wrongness we'd encountered in Kentucky. There was nothing, of course, just ordinary trees in an ordinary urban landscape. Yet as I drove home, the feeling persisted. At traffic lights, I studied the small patches of greenery that dotted the city. Parks, median strips, solitary trees growing from cutouts in the sidewalk. Had they always grown in these particular patterns? Had that oak always had that peculiar knot in its trunk? My apartment felt alien when I finally reached it, as if in my absence it had been subtly altered, furniture shifted by inches, shadows falling at slightly different angles than I remembered. I checked every room, every closet, telling myself I was being paranoid, but unable to shake the unease that had followed me from those Kentucky woods. I showered, the hot water sluicing away the hospital's antiseptic smell, but not the memory of oil-slick eyes and that final terrible smile. When I finally collapsed into bed, exhaustion quickly pulled me toward sleep despite my racing thoughts. Just before consciousness slipped away, I heard it, A soft sound, like branches moving in a gentle wind. My eyes snapped open, scanning the dark room, finding nothing out of place. But as sleep claimed me fully, I could have sworn I heard that layered, chorus-like voice whispering from somewhere very close. "We are becoming, Luke Brenton, and so are you." In the morning, I would dismiss it as a dream, a product of stress and trauma, and too many hours without proper rest. I would report for duty as usual, await my next assignment, continue the work of keeping the world safe from things it didn't believe in. But deep down, I knew the truth. What we had encountered in those Kentucky woods wasn't just another cryptid to be cataloged and contained. It was something older, something changing, something with purpose and direction that we had only begun to comprehend. And somehow it had marked me. Not as prey, but as something else entirely. The hunt wasn't over. It had only just begun. My name is Arthur Morn. I'm a man who spends most of his days in the less glamorous shadows of society, chasing things that most people don't even believe exist. For the last decade, I've been part of a unit that operates so far off the books that it might as well be folklore. We're tasked with hunting down creatures that defy conventional science, things that the public would dismiss as hallucinations, myths, or nightmares. But they're real, and they're deadly. Before this line of work, I lived a fairly average life, or at least as average as one can manage with a childhood spent in the Appalachian wilderness. My father was a trapper, a man of few words, but with a deep well of knowledge about the land and the creatures that inhabit it. He passed away when I was 16, and I suppose I inherited his skill set, tracking, patience, and a healthy respect for the unknown. It was enough to land me in the military and later into the lap of a government agency that operates without any formal name. We call ourselves the unit because it doesn't matter what we're called. Our work speaks for itself. I remember the first time I saw something that shouldn't exist. I was 23, fresh out of Special Forces training, hiking alone through the Blue Ridge Mountains. The forest had fallen silent in that unnatural way that hunters recognize, not the peaceful quiet of solitude, but the tense stillness of prey hiding from a predator. I froze, my instincts screaming danger before my conscious mind could process why. Then I saw it, something moving between the trees, its form shifting between shadow and substance. It stood upright like a man, but moved with impossible fluidity, as though its joints weren't constrained by normal anatomy. I blinked, and it was gone. 3 hikers disappeared in those mountains that week. The official report blamed a rogue bear. I knew better, but who would believe me? 6 months later, a man in a nondescript black sedan approached me outside my apartment. He never gave his name, just showed me photographs of what had been found at the site of a mountain lion attack in Oregon. The victim's remains had been arranged in geometric patterns. Mountain lions don't do that. "You've seen something similar, haven't you?" he asked. I nodded. "Would you like to do something about it?" That was my introduction to the unit. 12 years later, I've seen things that would make most people question their sanity. I've hunted creatures that evolutionary biology can't explain, entities that shouldn't be able to exist according to the laws of physics as we understand them. We operate in the shadows, cleaning up messes and containing threats before they become public knowledge. Most of our captures end up in secure facilities for study, though some prove too dangerous and must be neutralized. The public remains blissfully unaware, their worldview unchallenged by the horrors that lurk in the dark corners of reality. My handler, Director Wilson, coordinates our operations from a nondescript office building in Arlington, Virginia. He's 60-something with steel gray hair and the demeanor of a tenured professor rather than the commander of what amounts to a supernatural black ops team. His calm efficiency is almost disturbing when you consider the nature of what we hunt. "Morn," he said during our last briefing, sliding a manila folder across his immaculate desk. "We've got something unusual in western Pennsylvania." I raised an eyebrow. Unusual by our standards? Reports started 3 weeks ago in Riverbrook, small town, population 2,312, rural, isolated, perfect hunting ground. What are we looking at? Local police report 13 missing pets, 4 missing cattle, and 2 missing persons. though the latter haven't been connected to whatever's out there. Officially, they're still just missing. I flipped through the folder. Witnesses? 7 sightings. Descriptions vary, but there are common elements. Tall, unnaturally thin limbs, moves quickly. Most distinctive feature is the face. Several witnesses compared it to a deer skull. My interest piqued. Skeletal appearance? That's the thing, Wilson said, leaning forward. The descriptions aren't consistent about whether it has skin or not. Some say it's pale, others describe bare bone. But they all mention the face, like a deer skull, but with no eyes, just empty sockets, and a mouth that opens wider than it should. I'd hunted many things over the years, but this description didn't match anything in our classification system. New species weren't uncommon in our line of work, but they always presented unique challenges. Any patterns to its hunting, territory markers, nesting behavior? Wilson shook his head. That's why we need you there. Local authorities are treating these as routine animal attacks, but the consistency in descriptions caught our attention. Its keeping to the woods seems nocturnal. Beyond that, you'll need to establish its patterns once you're on site. When do I leave? Tonight. We've arranged a cover. Wildlife management consultant investigating possible cougar sightings. Local authorities have been notified to expect you, but they don't know your real purpose. I nodded. Standard procedure. The fewer people who knew the truth, the better. Equipment? Standard kit, plus some experimental tranquilizers Dr. Byrne developed. They should work on most biological systems, even unconventional ones. And if they don't, Wilson's expression hardened. Then you use the red syringe, but only as a last resort. We prefer specimens alive. I'd worked with Wilson long enough to understand the unspoken directive. The red syringe contained a neurotoxin that would kill almost anything with a nervous system. The unit preferred live captures for research purposes, but not at the expense of human lives or potential exposure. That night, I loaded my modified SUV with specialized gear, night vision goggles, thermal imaging equipment, tracking devices, and a small arsenal of weapons designed to incapacitate rather than kill. The heavy black case containing the tranquilizer gun was secured in a hidden compartment beneath the floor of the trunk. As I drove through the darkness toward western Pennsylvania, I couldn't shake the feeling that this case was different. After years of hunting the unexplainable, you develop a sixth sense for danger. And everything about this assignment made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I've learned to trust that feeling. It's kept me alive more times than I can count. The thing about hunting monsters is that sometimes, when you stare too long into the darkness, you start to wonder if the darkness is staring back. And with this case, I couldn't escape the sensation that something was watching me, waiting for me, before I'd even arrived. The town of Riverbrook emerged from the morning mist like something from a forgotten era. Nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forest, it was the kind of place that time seemed to have left behind. Main Street consisted of a handful of businesses, a general store, a diner, a hardware shop, and a small medical clinic. The surrounding residential areas were a patchwork of aged Victorian homes and modest farmhouses, with newer constructions scattered among them. I checked into the Riverbrook Inn, a 3-story building that had likely been grand in the 1920s, but now wore its age with quiet dignity. The proprietor, Mrs. Reed, was a woman in her 70s, with silver hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. Wildlife management, you say? She asked as she handed me my room key. About time somebody did something about whatever's been taking people's animals. I understand there have been some unusual sightings, I said casually, testing the waters. Mrs. Reed's expression darkened. Unusual isn't the word I'd use. Unnatural, more like. The Beckett boy said he saw something standing at the edge of their property last week. Said it was tall as a basketball hoop, but thin as a rail. Poor kid wouldn't go outside after dark now. Kids have active imaginations, I offered. It's not just kids, she said, lowering her voice. Gordon Walsh, he runs the hardware store. He saw something too, out by Miller's Creek. Said it moved like nothing he'd ever seen before, and Gordon's been hunting these woods for 40 years. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I'll be investigating all reports. Where would you recommend I start? Sheriff Monroe would be your best bet. His office is down at the end of Main Street. Though, between you and me, she leaned in conspiratorially, he doesn't believe there's anything strange out there. Just keep saying it's probably a bear or mountain lion. I'll speak with him, thank you. My room was Spartan but clean. A double bed, nightstand, dresser, and a bathroom that had been renovated sometime in the early 2000s. I unpacked my civilian clothes, leaving my specialized equipment locked in the SUV for now. Better to establish my cover first before arousing suspicion. Sheriff Monroe turned out to be exactly what I expected. A career lawman in his 50s, with a weathered face and the pragmatic demeanor of someone who dealt primarily with drunk drivers and domestic disputes. Wildlife management, he said, looking skeptical as I introduced myself. Don't recall requesting any assistance from the state. I'm here as a consultant, I explained. Reports of unusual animal activity prompted an investigation. I'm just gathering data at this stage. Monroe leaned back in his chair. Look, Mr. Morn, we've had some animal attacks, sure. Probably a mountain lion or maybe a bear that's lost its fear of humans. But some folks around here have been spreading wild stories, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't encourage them. What kind of stories? He sighed. You know how small towns are. One person sees something in the dark, and suddenly everyone's convinced there's a monster in the woods. I've got people talking about some kind of creature walking on two legs, looking like something out of a horror movie. And you don't believe them? I believe they saw something. Might have been a bear standing up. Might have been shadows playing tricks. Might have been their imagination running wild after hearing other folks' stories. What I don't believe is that there's some kind of undiscovered creature stalking our town. I nodded, playing along. Could I get copies of the reports about the missing animals and the missing persons cases as well? Missing persons? Monroe's expression sharpened. Now hold on, we've got two people unaccounted for, Rick Summers and Angela Cole. Rick's got a history of taking off when bill collectors come knocking, and Angela had a fight with her boyfriend the night before she disappeared. Neither case has anything to do with animal attacks. I'm just being thorough, I said smoothly. Any unusual death or disappearance in the area could be relevant to establishing patterns of wildlife behavior. He didn't look convinced, but eventually relented, instructing his deputy to pull the files. While I waited, I studied a map of the area pinned to the wall. Riverbrook was surrounded by dense forest on three sides, with a river running along its eastern border. Numerous hiking trails snaked through the wilderness, and several caves were marked in the northern forest. Here you go, the deputy said, handing me a stack of reports. All animal incidents from the past month, plus the missing persons files. I'd appreciate a list of witnesses too, I added. People who reported seeing something unusual. Sheriff Monroe frowned. I don't want you stirring up panic, Mr. Morn. I'm not here to cause trouble, Sheriff. Just to identify what might be killing livestock and pets. He stared at me for a long moment before nodding to his deputy. Give him the list, but keep it to people who filed official reports. I thanked them and left with my materials, feeling Monroe's suspicious gaze following me out the door. Law enforcement was always a mixed bag in these situations, sometimes helpful, sometimes obstacles to work around. Monroe seemed firmly in the latter category. Back in my room, I spread the reports across the bed, looking for patterns. The animal disappearances and killings formed a rough semicircle around the northern edge of town, gradually moving eastward over the past 3 weeks. Both missing persons had last been seen near areas where animal incidents had occurred. I marked the locations on my own map, creating a visual representation of the creature's hunting grounds. Based on the pattern, I could predict its likely territory. A section of forest that contained 2 of the marked caves. Perfect places for a predator to establish a den. The witness reports were revealing in their consistency. Despite varying descriptions of the creature's appearance, certain elements remained constant: its unusual height and thinness, its deer-like skull face, and its unsettling fluid movement. Several witnesses mentioned a strange smell, like wet earth and something rotting, according to Gordon Walsh's statement. As dusk approached, I prepared for my first night of reconnaissance. I changed into dark tactical clothing, loaded my gear into a backpack, and slipped out the back entrance of the inn to avoid being seen. My SUV was parked in a secluded spot behind the building, allowing me to retrieve my specialized equipment without drawing attention. The forest welcomed me with the familiar sounds of nature winding down for the night. Birds making their final calls, small animals rustling in the underbrush. I moved silently through the trees, years of training allowing me to navigate the terrain without disturbing the environment around me. I found a promising observation point on a rocky outcrop overlooking a clearing. According to my map, 3 animal attacks had occurred within a half-mile radius of this location. If the creature was following its established pattern, this area would be within its hunting ground tonight. As darkness fell completely, I activated my night vision goggles and settled in for a long wait. Hunting creatures like this required patience above all else. They were cautious, intelligent predators that knew how to avoid detection. Sometimes it took days of observation before I caught a glimpse of my target. Hours passed. The forest grew quieter, the nocturnal creatures seeming subdued. I recognized the silence, prey animals sensing a predator in their midst. Around 2 a.m. I heard it, a subtle sound different from the natural noises of the forest. Something moving with deliberate steps, trying to remain undetected but heavier than any normal wildlife in these woods. I remained perfectly still, controlling my breathing, knowing that many of these creatures had senses far more acute than humans. The sound moved closer, circling the clearing rather than crossing it directly. Smart. It was staying under the canopy, avoiding exposed areas. Then I saw it, a shadow moving between trees at the edge of my vision. Just a glimpse, but enough to confirm that this was no ordinary animal. It moved upright on 2 legs, its gait unnatural yet efficient. I couldn't make out details at this distance, but its proportions were wrong. Limbs too long, torso too narrow. I tracked its movement through the trees, keeping my position concealed. It paused occasionally, seeming to test the air. Hunting. For nearly an hour, I observed as it moved through its territory, never getting a clear enough view to confirm all the details from the witness descriptions. But what I did see was sufficient to know that Riverbrook's problem was definitely within the unit's jurisdiction. As the creature disappeared deeper into the forest, I marked its direction on my map. Based on its movement pattern, I had a strong suspicion about where its den might be located, one of the northern caves, most likely the largest one. Tomorrow night I would get closer. I made my way back to town as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky. The early risers of Riverbrook were just beginning their day as I slipped back into the inn unnoticed. Sleep would have to wait. I had interviews to conduct. My first stop was the Riverbrook Diner, where locals gathered for breakfast and gossip. I needed to hear the unofficial stories, the ones people wouldn't put in police reports but would share over coffee. The diner fell quiet when I entered, conversations pausing as people assessed the stranger in their midst. I took a seat at the counter, ordered coffee, and waited. Small towns operated on their own rhythms. Pushing too hard for information would only make people clam up. The waitress, Donna, according to her name tag, slid a mug of coffee in front of me. "You're the wildlife expert, aren't you?" she asked. "Mrs. Reed mentioned you were staying at the inn." News traveled fast in Riverbrook. "That's right, I am investigating the animal incidents." She glanced around before leaning closer. "My brother-in-law Victor was the one who found what was left of the miller's cow last week. Said it wasn't torn up like a normal animal attack. Said it looked," she hesitated, "deliberate, like something had taken it apart piece by piece." "Is Victor around? I'd like to talk to him." "He works at the lumber mill. Shift starts at 7. She straightened up as more customers entered. "But fair warning, he doesn't like talking about it. Says it gave him nightmares." Throughout the day, I interviewed witnesses from the sheriff's list, along with others suggested by locals willing to talk. Their stories painted a disturbing picture of a predator unlike anything previously documented in our files. Victor, the lumber mill worker, was particularly shaken by what he'd seen. "I've hunted all my life," he told me, chain-smoking as we talked behind the mill. "Seen what bears, cougars, wolves can do to an animal. This wasn't that. The cow was dissected, like something was studying its insides. And the bones, Some were missing, others arranged in patterns that didn't make sense. "Did you see any tracks?" I asked. He nodded. "Like deer tracks, but wrong. Too narrow, too deep. And they were bipedal. 2 legs, not 4. "And you told the sheriff this?" Victor laughed bitterly. "Sure did. He wrote it down and then told me I was probably confused from the shock of finding a dead animal. Said it was obviously coyotes." By evening, I had compiled enough information to confirm my suspicions and narrow my search area further. The creature was intelligent, methodical, and learning the patterns of the town. Most concerning were the reports of it watching houses from the forest edge, studying potential prey. The missing persons worried me. If this creature had progressed from animals to humans, the situation was escalating dangerously. I needed to find it quickly before anyone else disappeared. As night fell again, I returned to the forest, this time moving deeper toward the area where I suspected the creature's den might be located. The largest cave system was my primary target, dark, secluded, with multiple entrances and exits. Perfect for a predator that needed to remain hidden. The woods felt different tonight, oppressive, watching. I'd been in enough hunts to recognize when I was no longer just the hunter, but also potentially the hunted. Something had changed in the dynamic. Perhaps the creature had sensed my presence the previous night. I moved carefully, using every technique I'd mastered to remain undetected. The tranquilizer gun was loaded and ready at my side, the red syringe secured in a protected pocket of my tactical vest. I hoped I wouldn't need it. The entrance to the cave system loomed ahead, a dark maw in the hillside partially obscured by vegetation. I paused, listening intently. No sounds emerged from the darkness, but that meant nothing. The most dangerous predators were often the quietest. I activated a specialized sensory device developed by the unit's tech division. It detected subtle changes in air movement, temperature, and composition that might indicate a large organism's presence. The readings were immediate and unmistakable. Something was inside the cave, something that affected the environment around it in ways that differed from normal cave-dwelling creatures. I was in the right place. Now came the dangerous part. The cave mouth gaped before me like an open wound in the earth. Cool air wafted from its depths, carrying that peculiar scent multiple witnesses had described, damp soil mixed with something rotten. I adjusted my equipment, ensuring the night vision was functioning properly before stepping into the darkness. The entrance narrowed quickly into a tunnel that sloped downward, its walls slick with moisture. My footsteps, despite my careful movement, seemed amplified in the enclosed space. I paused frequently to listen, but the only sounds were water dripping somewhere deeper in the cave system and my own controlled breathing. After about 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. My night vision revealed a space roughly 30 feet in diameter, its ceiling lost in darkness above. Several smaller tunnels branched off from this central room. The floor was littered with debris, leaves, branches, and bones. Many bones. I crouched to examine them. Most appeared to be from local wildlife, deer, raccoons, foxes, but some were larger. Cattle bones matching the missing livestock reports. I arranged them carefully, searching for patterns mentioned by witnesses, but found none. This wasn't a ritual site. It was a feeding ground. A sound echoed from one of the tunnels, a subtle scraping, like something hard dragging against stone. I froze, weapon ready, eyes fixed on the dark opening. Nothing emerged. I waited 5 minutes before moving again, approaching the tunnel from which the sound had come. It was narrower than the entrance passage, requiring me to bend slightly to proceed. The air grew colder as I advanced, the smell stronger. Something about it triggered a primal response in my brain, a warning signal honed by evolution to alert humans to danger. The tunnel curved sharply, then opened into another chamber, smaller than the first but with a higher ceiling. And here, I found what I was looking for. The walls were marked with strange symbols, not carved but drawn with something dark that my night vision rendered in shades of green. They resembled no language or symbolic system I recognized from previous cases. Beneath them, arranged in concentric circles, were more bones, but these were different. Human bones, smaller than adult bones should be. My stomach tightened. The missing persons cases suddenly took on new urgency. I counted the remains, trying to determine if they could account for the 2 missing adults or if they represented older victims. The fragmented nature of the remains made it difficult to be certain, but I estimated parts from at least 3 different individuals. A slight movement at the corner of my vision made me spin, weapon raised. Nothing was visible, but I could feel it, a presence, watching. The chamber had another exit, a narrow crevice that disappeared into darkness. Had something just slipped through it? I approached cautiously, examining the opening. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but the creature, with its unnaturally thin build, would have no difficulty navigating it. I considered my options. Following it through such a tight space would put me at a significant tactical disadvantage. A soft sound behind me made the decision irrelevant. I turned slowly, already knowing what I would see. It stood in the entrance through which I had come, effectively blocking my exit. In the green-tinted view of my night vision, I could see it clearly for the first time. The witnesses had been right about its general appearance, but had failed to capture its true wrongness. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its limbs elongated beyond natural proportions, joints bending in subtle ways that human joints shouldn't. Its skin, and it did have skin, not exposed bone as some had claimed, was pallid and stretched tightly over its frame, with a network of dark veins visible beneath. But its face, that was where description failed. It resembled a deer's skull in its general shape, but the comparison didn't do justice to its alienness. Where eyes should have been were deep, empty sockets that somehow still conveyed the sense of watching. Its mouth was a horizontal slash that extended too far across its face, lined with those needle-like teeth witnesses had mentioned. It stood perfectly still, evaluating me with those non-existent eyes. I kept my weapon trained on it, finger hovering near the trigger. The tranquilizer might not work if its biology was too different from known organisms. The red syringe might be necessary. "Can you understand me?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Some entities we encountered were intelligent, capable of communication, or at least comprehension. Others were purely instinctual predators. The creature tilted its head slightly, reminiscent of a curious dog. But it made no sound, gave no clear indication of understanding. I maintained eye contact, or whatever passed for it with this being, while slowly reaching for a small device on my belt. It emitted frequencies beyond human hearing, designed to disorient certain types of creatures we'd encountered previously. The moment I activated it, I knew it was a mistake. The creature's reaction was immediate and violent. It arched backward, its mouth opening to reveal row upon row of those needle teeth, extending far deeper into its throat than should have been physically possible. The sound it emitted defied description, a high-pitched keening that seemed to vibrate through my bones rather than reach my ears through the air. It lunged forward with that unnatural speed witnesses had described. I fired the tranquilizer, hitting it square in the chest, but it showed no immediate effect. Its long, spindly fingers, tipped with sharp, bone-like protrusions, swiped at me as I dove to the side. I rolled across the bone-strewn floor, coming up against the far wall. The creature whirled with impossible agility, its movements fluid yet somehow wrong, like watching film footage played at an uneven speed. The second tranquilizer dart caught it in the neck. This time its movements faltered slightly. It staggered, those empty eye sockets still fixed on me, its mouth opening and closing soundlessly. I seized the opportunity to move toward the exit, keeping my weapon trained on the creature. It followed my movement, its head rotating too far, too smoothly on its neck. As I reached the tunnel entrance, it lunged again. This time its movement was slower, the tranquilizers beginning to take effect. I fired a third dart, more out of instinct than necessity, watching as it embedded in the creature's shoulder. It stumbled, its limbs seemingly disconnected from each other, movements growing uncoordinated. But it didn't go down. Instead, it did something I hadn't anticipated. It reached up to its neck, fingers wrapping around the darts, and pulled them out with deliberate care. Then it looked at me again, head tilting in that unnerving way. It was learning, adapting. I backed into the tunnel, never taking my eyes off it. The creature followed, its movements growing steadier as it fought the effects of the tranquilizer. Whatever this thing was, its metabolism processed the sedative faster than anything I'd encountered before. The red syringe now seemed inevitable. I reached for it as I continued to retreat, my back scraping against the narrow tunnel wall. The creature paused, watching this new movement. Then, unexpectedly, it turned and fled. Not toward me, but back into the chamber, disappearing through the crevice I'd noticed earlier. The speed of its departure was startling after its drugged movements seconds before. I stood frozen, unsure whether to feel relief or heightened concern. It had recognized the red syringe as a greater threat than the tranquilizer. That suggested a level of intelligence and prior knowledge that troubled me deeply. I considered pursuing it, but decided against it. The narrow crevice would put me at too great a disadvantage, and the creature clearly knew this cave system better than I did. Better to retreat, report what I'd found, and return with better intelligence, and possibly backup. As I made my way back through the tunnels, a new worry formed. The creature had seen me clearly now. It knew I was hunting it, and if its intelligence was as high as I suspected, it might change its patterns or even go into hiding, making capture much more difficult. Worse, it might decide to eliminate the threat I posed. I emerged from the cave into the night air, pulling out my secure satellite phone to contact Director Wilson. This situation had escalated beyond a routine capture mission. The combination of human remains, apparent intelligence, and resistance to our standard methods placed this entity in a higher threat category. "This is Morn," I said when Wilson answered. "I've made contact with the target. It's not in any of our existing classifications. Humanoid, but with significant anatomical differences. Extremely fast, strong, and intelligent. Resistant to standard tranquilizers." "Casualties?" Wilson's voice was clinical. "Evidence of at least 3 human victims in its den, possibly more. The missing persons from town are almost certainly dead. Assessment of threat level. High and increasing. It's aware of me now. Showed signs of tactical thinking. I'm concerned it might escalate its hunting patterns or go to ground." There was a pause before Wilson responded. "Containment priority has shifted. If capture isn't feasible, elimination is authorized. I'm sending Agent Reeves as backup. ETA 14 hours. I acknowledged the order and ended the call. Reeves was good, one of the unit's most experienced agents. But 14 hours was a long time when dealing with a creature that had just been cornered and might now be desperate or aggressive. Dawn was approaching as I made my way back to town. The eastern sky was lightening, birds beginning their morning chorus. I needed rest and time to formulate a new strategy. The creature appeared nocturnal, which gave me the daylight hours to prepare. As I neared the edge of town, something caught my eye. Movement in the tree line opposite where I stood. I raised my binoculars, scanning the area carefully. Nothing. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The creature had fled deeper into the cave system, not toward town. It couldn't have circled around this quickly, could it? I returned to the inn, slipping in through my window rather than using the door. Better not to have my unusual hours noted by the proprietor or other guests. After securing my equipment, I showered, watching as dirt and cave dust swirled down the drain, along with small smears of blood from where the cave walls had scraped my arms. Sleep came fitfully, my dreams filled with empty eye sockets and teeth that extended too far back into impossible mouths. I woke several times, reaching instinctively for my weapon before remembering I was in the relative safety of the inn. When I finally rose around noon, my first priority was checking in with the sheriff. If the creature had changed its behavior due to our encounter, there might already be reports of new sightings or incidents. Sheriff Monroe looked tired when I entered his office, the kind of exhaustion that comes from a long night of work rather than poor sleep. "Something happen?" I asked, noting the additional deputies bustling around the station. Monroe's expression was grim. "Another disappearance last night. Michael West, 16 years old. Didn't come home from his friend's house. His backpack was found at the edge of the North Woods." My chest tightened. "Any signs of animal activity?" "That's the thing," Monroe said, lowering his voice. "There were tracks, not like any animal I've ever seen. Two-legged, narrow, deep impressions, like someone described seeing a few weeks back. I kept my expression neutral, despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. The creature had indeed changed its pattern, moving from the cave to hunting near town, taking a victim much sooner than its previous timeline would have suggested, and a teenager, younger than its previous adult victims but older than the child remains I'd found in the cave. Its prey selection was evolving. "I need to see those tracks," I said. Monroe nodded, his previous skepticism apparently diminished by this new evidence. "Deputy Ross can take you out there now. We've got search parties organizing, but—" He trailed off. But the boy was almost certainly already dead. We both knew it, though neither said it aloud. Deputy Ross was a young officer, probably in his mid-20s, with a nervous energy that suggested he was relatively new to the job. He drove me to the site where Michael West's backpack had been found, filling the journey with anxious chatter. "Never seen the sheriff this shook up," he said. "He's been telling everyone it was just normal animal attacks all this time. But these tracks, they're not normal. And now a kid's missing." "Has anything like this happened in Riverbrook before?" I asked. Ross shook his head. "Not that I know of. Been some missing hikers over the years, but that happens everywhere with wilderness this dense. People get lost, fall down ravines, exposure gets them. But this feels different." The site was at the forest edge, just beyond the backyard of the last house on Cedar Lane. Michael's backpack lay where it had been found, surrounded by police tape. Beyond it, clearly visible in the soft earth, were the tracks. I crouched to examine them closely. They matched what I'd observed in the cave, bipedal prints with an unusual narrowness and depth that suggested the creature's strange weight distribution. But there was something new here. The tracks showed signs of dragging, as if the creature had been pulling something heavy, or someone. I followed the tracks into the woods for about 30 yards before they disappeared on rockier ground. The drag marks remained visible intermittently, disturbed undergrowth, broken twigs, small smears of what might have been blood on tree bark. "Does the search team have dogs?" I asked Ross. "Yeah, they're bringing them in from the county sheriff's office. Should be here within the hour." I nodded, continuing to scan the area. "The creature, whatever's doing this, it's heading northeast, toward the cave system." Ross looked at me sharply. "You sound like you know what it is." I chose my words carefully. "I have some theories based on tracks and witness descriptions. It's definitely not a conventional predator." "What do you think it is?" I met his gaze. "Something that shouldn't be here, something dangerous." Ross swallowed visibly. "The search parties, are they in danger?" "Yes," I said simply. "They should be armed and should not split up into groups smaller than 4, and they should not enter any caves they find." "I'll radio the sheriff." As Ross made the call, I continued examining the area, looking for any clues that might help me understand why the creature had suddenly changed its behavior. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. I had confronted it in its den, and immediately afterward, it had hunted closer to town than ever before, taking a victim in a more populated area. Was it sending a message, retaliating, or simply desperate after being driven from its primary feeding ground? The search for Michael West continued throughout the afternoon, with teams combing the woods in the direction I'd indicated. I joined one group, keeping watch for any signs of the creature while the others focused on finding the boy. The dogs followed the scent trail to the same rocky area where I'd lost the tracks earlier, then became agitated and confused, whining and circling without picking up the trail again. As dusk approached, Sheriff Monroe reluctantly called off the search until morning. The woods were too dangerous after dark, especially now that he was taking the creature sighting seriously. I had no intention of waiting until daylight. Agent Reeves would arrive around midnight, and I planned to return to the cave before then. If the creature had taken Michael there, speed was essential. And if not, if it had established a new hunting ground, I needed to find it before it claimed another victim. Back at the inn, I prepared my equipment with methodical precision. The tranquilizer gun was still my primary weapon, loaded with darts containing a stronger sedative Dr. Byrne had developed for particularly resistant organisms. The red syringe remained a last resort, But after witnessing the creature's intelligence and adaptation to the standard tranquilizer, I placed it in a more accessible pocket. I added several new items to my kit. Specialized restraints designed for entities with unusual anatomies, a stronger version of the frequency emitter that had provoked the creature, this one capable of more precise tuning, and a thermal imaging device that operated on a broader spectrum than standard models, able to detect heat signatures that differed significantly from mammalian patterns. Mrs. Reed knocked on my door as I was finishing my preparations. "Mr. Morn, there's a call for you at the front desk." I secured my equipment before following her downstairs, wondering who would be calling me at the inn rather than my secure phone. The lobby was empty except for an elderly man reading a newspaper in an armchair. Mrs. Reed handed me the receiver. "Line 2. Morn speaking," I said. "It's Deputy Ross." His voice was hushed, tense. "Something's happened. I can't talk about it on an open line. Can you meet me at the station?" "When?" "Now. Use the back entrance." The call ended before I could ask further questions. Something about it felt wrong, the urgency, the secrecy. But if there had been a development in the case, I needed to know. I drove to the sheriff's station, circling around to the rear parking lot as instructed. The area was deserted, illuminated only by a single security light above the back door. I approached cautiously, one hand near my concealed sidearm. The door was unlocked. I entered, finding myself in a dimly lit hallway that presumably led to the main office area. But there was no sign of Ross or any other deputies. "Ross?" I called, keeping my voice low. No response. I moved further into the building, senses heightened. The station was unnaturally quiet. Even at this hour, there should have been some activity. A dispatcher, an officer on night duty. The hallway opened into the main office space. Empty desks, computer screens dark. No one at the front counter. No movement in Monroe's office. Then I saw it. A smear of dark liquid on the floor near the cells at the back of the room. Blood. I drew my weapon, advancing slowly toward the cells. The door to the first one stood open, more blood visible on its frame. Inside, sprawled on the floor, was Deputy Ross. His throat had been torn open, the wound ragged and deep. His eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling, face frozen in an expression of terror. He hadn't been dead long. The blood was still wet. I checked the other cells quickly, empty, then moved back to the main office, scanning for any sign of the creature. Nothing appeared disturbed except for the front door, which stood slightly ajar. My satellite phone vibrated. Director Wilson. "Morn," I answered quietly. "Reeves is ahead of schedule. ETA 1 hour. What's your situation?" I quickly explained what I'd found at the sheriff's station. "This changes things," Wilson said. "It's targeting law enforcement now, escalating dramatically." It lured me here, I realized aloud. Used Ross's voice somehow to get me to the station. "Mimicry," Wilson noted. "That's a new capability, not in the original witness reports. It's adapting rapidly, learning." I moved toward the front door, checking the street outside. Empty. I need to find the sheriff. Warn him. Negative. Meet Reeves at the rendezvous point. This is now a level 1 containment situation. Town evacuation protocols may be necessary. I knew he was right, but the thought of the creature loose in town, potentially hunting the sheriff or other officers, was troubling. "I'll contact Monroe from the road." I hung up and was about to leave when I noticed something on Ross's desk. A map of Riverbrook, similar to the one in my room, but with markings that didn't match my own analysis. Circles had been drawn around several locations, including the inn where I was staying. My blood chilled as I realized the implication. The creature wasn't just hunting randomly anymore. It was targeting specific locations, places connected to me and the investigation. I needed to warn Mrs. Reed and the other guests at the inn. I raced back to the Riverbrook Inn, pushing my SUV to its limits on the empty streets. My mind churned through possibilities, none of them good. If the creature had killed Ross to lure me to the station, its intelligence and strategic thinking were far beyond what we typically encountered. It wasn't just adapting to threats, it was actively countering them. The inn's parking lot was dark when I arrived, the building itself illuminated only by a few ground floor windows and the porch light. I approached cautiously, weapon drawn, scanning the surroundings for any sign of the creature. The front door was unlocked, unusual for this hour. I entered silently, the old floorboards creaking despite my care. The lobby was empty, the reception desk unattended. "Mrs. Reed?" I called. No answer. I moved deeper into the building, checking the small dining room and lounge. Both empty. A coffee cup sat on a side table, still half full, suggesting a hasty departure. A noise from upstairs made me freeze, a soft thump, like something heavy being dropped on carpeted floor. I ascended the stairs slowly, testing each step before putting my full weight on it. The second-floor hallway stretched before me, doors closed on either side. Most were guest rooms, including my own at the far end. I checked each room methodically, finding them either empty or occupied by sleeping guests who were startled but unharmed when I woke them. I instructed them to lock their doors and stay inside, not explaining the full situation to avoid panic. Mrs. Reed's private quarters were on the third floor. As I climbed the final flight of stairs, that familiar feeling of wrongness intensified. The air seemed thicker, carrying that same earthy, rotting scent I'd detected in the cave. The third-floor hallway was darker than the lower levels, the single window at its end providing minimal illumination. Mrs. Reed's door was ajar, a thin line of light spilling into the corridor. I approached cautiously, listening. No sounds came from within. I pushed the door open slowly with the barrel of my gun. The room was in disarray, furniture overturned, personal belongings scattered across the floor, signs of struggle but no blood, and no Mrs. Reed. A soft sound behind me made me whirl around, weapon raised. Nothing visible in the dark hallway. But I could feel it, that presence, watching. The same sensation I'd experienced in the cave. "I know you're there," I said evenly, moving back toward the stairs, maintaining a defensive position. "What have you done with Mrs. Reed?" No response, but the feeling of being observed intensified. I backed down the first few steps, never taking my eyes off the hallway. Movement flickered at the edge of my vision, something tall and thin slipping into one of the guest rooms. I fired instinctively, the tranquilizer dart embedding in the doorframe as the creature vanished from sight. I followed cautiously, knowing I was being drawn into a confrontation, but seeing no alternative. The room the creature had entered was registered to a couple from Pittsburgh, the Aldersons, who had checked in yesterday. I had woken them during my initial sweep, confirming they were safe. Now the door stood open, no light visible inside. "Mr. and Mrs. Alderson?" I called from the threshold. Silence. I entered, sweeping the room with my weapon. The bed was empty, covers thrown back as if the occupants had left in a hurry. The bathroom door was closed. As I moved toward it, something dropped from the ceiling behind me. I spun, firing twice in rapid succession. The darts struck the creature's chest as it lunged toward me, those long limbs extended, fingers spread to reveal sharp, bone-like protrusions. The impact of the tranquilizer seemed to stagger it momentarily, enough for me to dodge its initial attack. It recovered quickly, circling me with that unnatural, fluid movement. In the dim light from the hallway, I could see it more clearly than in the cave. Its skin had a translucent quality, the network of dark veins beneath pulsing visibly. The empty eye sockets seemed to fix on me with malevolent intent, though how it perceived the world remained a mystery. I fired again, the dart striking its shoulder. 3 doses of the enhanced tranquilizer should have been enough to down an elephant, but the creature merely shuddered before continuing its circle. It made a sound then, not the high-pitched keening from the cave, but something more deliberate, a voice that wasn't a voice, forming words that weren't quite words. "Hunter." The sound froze me momentarily. It was attempting communication, or more likely, mimicry of human speech, similar to how it had imitated Ross's voice on the phone. "Where are the people from this room?" I demanded, keeping my weapon trained on it. "Where is Mrs. Reed?" The creature's mouth opened wider than should have been physically possible, revealing those rows of needle teeth. Gone. Taken, like the others. Its speech was halting, the consonants malformed, but unmistakably an attempt at English. This was unprecedented. None of our records mentioned creatures of this type having language capabilities. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, partly to keep it talking while I assessed my options, partly out of genuine curiosity. The creature tilted its head in that unsettling way. Hungry, always hungry. For what, blood? Flesh? It made a sound that might have been laughter, a dry, rattling noise. Memories, fear, pain, a psychic feeder. That explained the ritualistic arrangement of bones, the preservation of certain body parts. It wasn't just consuming flesh, but somehow extracting psychological or emotional energy from its victims. The tranquilizer clearly wasn't going to work. I needed to switch tactics. The red syringe was in my left pocket, but reaching for it would require me to momentarily shift my aim from the creature. Before I could decide, it spoke again. You hunt. I hunt. Same. We're nothing alike, I said firmly. Both predators. Both kill. I only kill when necessary, to protect others. The creature's mouth stretched in what might have been a grin. Same. Hunt to live. Live to hunt. It was trying to establish some kind of connection, find common ground. A sophisticated manipulation tactic that further demonstrated its intelligence. But there was no common ground to be found with an entity that fed on human suffering. Where are they? I demanded again. The people you've taken? Safe, waiting, fresh. The implication turned my stomach. It was keeping them alive, presumably to prolong whatever process it used to feed on their fear or pain. I had to end this now. In one fluid motion, I reached for the red syringe with my left hand, while maintaining my aim with the right. The creature tracked the movement, its head turning sharply to focus on the syringe. No, it said, the words suddenly clearer, more urgent. Poison. Death. So it did recognize the syringe's purpose. That meant it had encountered the unit before or something similar. Where did you come from? I asked, stalling while I calculated the best approach for administering the syringe. How did you get to Riverbrook? It made that rattling laugh sound again. Always here, sleeping, waiting, hungry. What woke you? Blood in the earth, machines digging deep, released. The lumber mill. There had been recent expansions, new areas of forest cleared for logging. They must have disturbed something, a hibernation chamber perhaps, or a barrier that had kept this creature contained. The creature suddenly went still, its head cocked as if listening. Then it moved with that startling speed, not toward me but toward the window. Glass shattered as it crashed through, disappearing into the night. I rushed to the window, scanning the darkness below. No sign of the creature, but approaching headlights caught my attention. A black SUV similar to mine turning into the inn's parking lot. Agent Reeves arriving ahead of schedule. I needed to warn him immediately. The creature was more dangerous than we'd anticipated, its abilities beyond anything in our classification system. And if it recognized the red syringe, it might specifically target Reeves as another unit operative. I hurried downstairs, meeting Reeves as he entered the lobby. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with close-cropped gray hair and the watchful eyes of someone who had seen too much in his career. "Morn," he greeted me tersely. "Update?" I quickly briefed him on the latest developments, Ross's murder, the missing innkeeper and guests, and most importantly, my direct interaction with the creature. "It speaks?" Reeves asked, his expression skeptical. None of the reports mentioned vocalization. "It's evolving rapidly, learning, adapting, and it recognized the red syringe, knew exactly what it was for." Reeves frowned. "That suggests prior contact with the unit or a similar organization, or that it's encountered this specific neurotoxin before. Either way, we're dealing with something far more intelligent than initially assessed." Reeves opened a heavy black case he'd brought from his vehicle, revealing an array of specialized weapons and equipment. "Wilson has upgraded this to a Class A containment situation. Capture is no longer the priority. We need to neutralize it before more civilians disappear." I nodded grimly. Class A meant the threat level was deemed extreme, with high risk of multiple casualties or potential exposure of the unit's operations to the public. "I think I know where it's keeping the victims," I said. "The cave system where I first encountered it. Based on what it said, it's keeping them alive. For what purpose? It feeds on fear, pain, possibly other psychological states. Mentioned consuming memories." Reeves selected a weapon from his case, a modified shotgun that fired specialized rounds designed to deliver the same neurotoxin as the red syringe, but at a distance. Psychic vampire. Nasty. The longer it feeds, the stronger it gets. And the more it learns, I added. It's already demonstrating abilities beyond what should be possible for its species, assuming it matches anything in our database. It doesn't, Reeves confirmed. Wilson had the description cross-referenced with all known entities. No matches. This is something new. Or very, very old, I thought, remembering the creature's words. Always here, sleeping, waiting. We quickly developed a plan. Reeves would secure the town, checking on Sheriff Monroe and organizing protection for the remaining civilians. I would return to the cave, attempting to locate and rescue any survivors while tracking the creature back to its lair. It knows these woods better than we do, I warned, and it's fixated on me now. It approached me directly, tried to communicate. That could work to our advantage, Reeves said, handing me one of the specialized shotguns. You draw it out, I'll be the unexpected variable. I accepted the weapon, checking its mechanism. Be careful. It's faster than anything I've ever hunted, and it can mimic voices. That's how it lured me to the station. Reeves nodded grimly. 14 years with the unit, and I've never encountered anything that could do that. This thing is outside our experience parameters. That was precisely what concerned me. The unit classified and cataloged every entity it encountered, building a database of weaknesses, behaviors, and effective containment methods. An unknown entity meant unpredictable dangers. We synchronized our communications and parted ways, Reeves heading toward the sheriff's office while I returned to my SUV to drive back to the forest edge nearest the cave system. The night had deepened, clouds obscuring the moon and stars. Perfect conditions for the creature to move undetected, and for me to track it using the specialized equipment the unit provided. I parked a half-mile from the cave entrance, proceeding on foot through the silent forest. The usual nocturnal sounds were absent, confirming the predator's presence in the area. I moved cautiously, utilizing every technique I'd mastered to remain undetected while covering ground efficiently. The cave entrance looked different than during my previous visit, wider somehow, as if something had recently expanded it. Fresh drag marks scarred the ground leading inside, still damp in places. Recent. I activated my thermal imaging device, scanning the interior. Multiple heat signatures registered deeper in the cave system, human-sized, clustered together. Survivors. I reported my findings to Reeves via our secure communication system. 5 heat signatures approximately 200 yards in. Configuration suggests restrained human captives, no sign of the creature. Roger that, Reeves responded. Sheriff Monroe is dead. Found him in his car outside town, neck broken, body partially consumed. I've contacted Wilson for evacuation protocols. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. With both the sheriff and his deputy dead, maintaining the secrecy of our operation would become increasingly difficult. Once morning came, the absence of law enforcement would be noticed. Questions would be asked. Time frame for evacuation? I asked. Dawn at earliest. Containment team ETA 3 hours. That meant we had to neutralize the creature and secure any survivors before sunrise. A challenging timeline, but not impossible. I advanced into the cave, moving with practiced silence despite the challenging terrain. The tunnel system had changed since my last visit. New passages had formed, others had collapsed. It was as if the cave itself was being reshaped to serve the creature's needs. The chamber where I'd first encountered the creature was now significantly larger, its ceiling higher, its walls marked with more of those strange symbols, drawn in what I now recognized as blood. The bone arrangements had grown more complex, forming spiraling patterns across the floor that forced me to step carefully to avoid disturbing them. The heat signatures led me deeper, through a passage that descended steeply into the earth. The air grew colder, the damp smell stronger, mixed with the unmistakable scent of human fear, sweat, urine, blood. The passage opened into a chamber I hadn't seen before, larger than any I'd encountered in this system, and there, arranged in a semicircle against the far wall, were the missing people. Mrs. Reed, the Aldersons, Michael West, and others I didn't recognize, presumably the previously missing Rick Summers and Angela Cole. They were bound with what appeared to be organic material, possibly hardened secretions from the creature itself. Their eyes were open but vacant, expressions frozen in terror, alive but unresponsive. I approached cautiously, checking each for immediate life-threatening injuries. They bore various cuts and puncture wounds, primarily on their heads and necks, but nothing fatal. Their breathing was shallow, pulses weak but steady. "I've located the captives," I reported to Reeves. 6 individuals, alive but unresponsive, appear to be in some kind of trance state. "Can you move them?" I examined the restraints more closely. "Negative. They're secured with some kind of organic compound, would need specialized tools to remove safely. Hold position. I'll bring extraction equipment. ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes was a long time to remain exposed in the creature's lair. I set up a defensive position, placing motion sensors at the chamber's entrance and preparing both the tranquilizer gun and the neurotoxin shotgun. As I waited, I examined the chamber more carefully. The walls were covered with those blood symbols, but here they formed more complex patterns, almost like circuit diagrams or mathematical equations. Interspersed among them were crude drawings depicting human-like figures in various states of distress. A record of past feedings or something more. Instructions, perhaps, or a form of communication with others of its kind. I was examining one particularly complex symbol when my motion sensor gave a soft alert. Something was approaching. Not from the tunnel I'd used to enter, but from a narrow fissure in the ceiling I hadn't noticed before. I positioned myself between the approaching threat and the captives, weapon ready. The creature emerged from the ceiling opening with that unnatural fluidity, its limbs seeming to flow rather than move as it descended to the chamber floor. It made no aggressive move, instead standing perfectly still, those empty eye sockets fixed on me. "Hunter," it said, its voice clearer than before. "You find them." "I'm taking them back," I said firmly, the shotgun aimed at its chest. The creature tilted its head. "No, need them. For food? For their fear? For passage?" I frowned, not understanding. Passage to where? The creature gestured at the symbols on the wall. Home, others, waiting. A cold realization dawned. This wasn't just a predator. It was a scout, an advanced entity for something larger. The symbols weren't a record, they were a beacon, a way to guide others of its kind here. "How many others?" I demanded. The creature's mouth stretched in that grotesque approximation of a smile. "Many, hungry, waiting." This changed everything. If the creature was attempting to bring others of its kind to our world, to open some kind of doorway or portal, the threat level expanded exponentially. "You can't have them," I said, finger tightening on the trigger. "And you can't bring others here. Too late." The creature's voice had taken on a rhythmic quality, almost sing-song. "Process, begun, need, only, one, more." It took me a moment to grasp the implication. One more sacrifice to complete whatever ritual or process it had initiated. Me. The creature moved with that blinding speed, not toward me as I expected, but toward the captives. I fired the shotgun, the specialized round striking it in the shoulder. It screamed, a sound that seemed to exist both in the air and inside my head, and staggered, but didn't fall. Instead, it reached Mrs. Reed, its elongated fingers wrapping around her throat. A warning. A hostage. "Drop. Weapon." Its voice was strained, but clearer than ever. "Or she dies." I kept the shotgun trained on it, calculating angles, trying to find a shot that wouldn't risk Mrs. Reed. There wasn't one. "You need her alive," I countered. "For your ritual." "No, need. All can lose one." To demonstrate its point, it tightened its grip. Mrs. Reed's vacant eyes bulged, her breathing becoming labored. "Stop," I said, lowering the weapon slightly. "Let's talk. Explain what you need, what this passage is." The creature relaxed its grip on Mrs. Reed, though it kept its hand at her throat. "Gateway, to, bring, family." "Your family, more like you?" "Yes, trapped, other side, long time." "How long?" "Before your kind walked upright." "Ancient then, possibly prehistoric." That would explain why it wasn't in any of our databases. It predated human record-keeping, perhaps human civilization itself. "And this ritual will bring them here?" "All of them?" "Yes. Hungry, so hungry." The implications were catastrophic. If this creature could cause this much death and terror alone, a group of them would be devastating. And based on its earlier comments about feeding on fear and pain, their arrival would turn Riverbrook, and potentially beyond, into a farm for harvesting human suffering. "I can't let that happen," I said, raising the shotgun again. The creature hissed, its free hand suddenly swiping toward me with impossible reach, knocking the weapon from my grasp. It skittered across the cave floor, stopping near the tunnel entrance. "No, choice!" The creature released Mrs. Reed, shoving her roughly aside as it advanced toward me. "Need, you, special, hunter, strong, memories." I backed away, reaching for my sidearm, a conventional firearm that would likely do little against this entity but might slow it down. "Reeves," I said into my communicator, "creature is in the chamber. Situation critical. It's trying to open a gateway to bring more of its kind through." No response. Either Reeves was out of range in these deep caves, or something had happened to him. The creature continued its advance, those long limbs carrying it forward with measured steps. It seemed in no hurry now, confident in its advantage. "Feed. On. Fear," it said, almost conversationally. "You, not afraid, different, taste." "I've hunted worse than you," I lied, still retreating strategically toward the fallen shotgun. "No, you haven't." The creature's voice had become almost fluid, adaptations happening in real time as it learned human speech patterns. "I am ancient, before your kind had names for fear." It lunged suddenly, faster than I could react, those elongated fingers wrapping around my throat, lifting me off the ground. Its strength was immense, belying its thin frame. Up close, I could see details I'd missed before, patterns in its skin that resembled the symbols on the walls, a faint luminescence emanating from the depths of those empty eye sockets. "Your memories," it whispered, its face inches from mine. "Your experiences, the things you've seen, the creatures you've hunted. All mine now." I felt it then, a presence in my mind, sifting through memories, experiences, knowledge. The intrusion was excruciating, like ice picks driving into my brain from multiple angles. I struggled against it, trying to shield my thoughts, particularly my knowledge of the unit and its operations. The creature's grip tightened, its other hand moving to my forehead, those bone-like protrusions at its fingertips pressing against my skin. "Stop fighting," it hissed. "Give me what I need." Through the pain, I became aware of movement at the chamber entrance, a figure silhouetted against the relative brightness of the tunnel beyond. Reeves. I needed to distract the creature, keep its attention focused on me for just a few more seconds. "You want to know what I've hunted?" I gasped, fighting through the pain of its mental invasion. "Let me show you." Instead of resisting its presence in my mind, I thrust forward specific memories, the most terrifying entities I'd encountered in my years with the unit. The hive mind parasite from the Mojave Desert that consumed its victims from the inside out. The shadow predator from the Maine wilderness that could slip between dimensions. The psychic leech from the Louisiana bayou that left its victims conscious but empty, aware but unable to move or communicate for the remainder of their lives. The creature recoiled mentally, its grip on my throat loosening slightly as it processed these new horrors, things that even it, ancient as it was, found disturbing. That moment of distraction was all Reeves needed. The specialized shotgun roared, the round striking the creature square in the back. It screamed, that dual sound of physical and psychic agony, and dropped me, whirling to face this new threat. Reeves fired again, hitting it in the chest. The creature staggered, but still advanced toward him, moving with that unnatural speed despite its injuries. I scrambled for my fallen sidearm, knowing it wouldn't kill the creature, but might distract it long enough for Reeves to reload. I fired repeatedly, emptying the clip into the creature's back. It barely seemed to notice, focused entirely on Reeves now. Reeves managed one more shot before the creature reached him, those elongated fingers wrapping around the shotgun barrel, tearing it from his grasp with such force that I heard bone snap in Reeves' arm. He cried out, stumbling backward, but maintained enough presence of mind to draw a combat knife from his belt. The blade slashed across the creature's midsection, drawing a viscous, dark fluid that might have been its blood. The wound sealed almost immediately, the edges knitting together before my eyes. I needed the red syringe. It was our only chance now. I searched frantically, realizing it had fallen from my pocket during the creature's attack. There, glinting in the dim light near where I'd been held, I lunged for it, fingers closing around the protective casing. The creature sensed my movement, turning its attention back to me, recognizing the threat the syringe represented. "No!" it screamed, abandoning Reeves to charge toward me. Reeves seized the opportunity, tackling it from behind. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs, human and inhuman. The creature was stronger, faster, but Reeves was a veteran hunter, using leverage and technique to momentarily pin it. "Now mourn," he shouted. I didn't hesitate. I drove the red syringe into the creature's neck, depressing the plunger fully, delivering the entire dose of neurotoxin directly into whatever passed for its circulatory system. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The creature convulsed violently, throwing Reeves off as its limbs thrashed in uncoordinated spasms. That mouth opened impossibly wide, emitting a scream that seemed to vibrate through the very stone around us. Its skin began to change, the pale translucence giving way to a brittle, ashen appearance that spread from the injection site outward. I grabbed Reeves, pulling him away from the thrashing entity. "We need to get the captives out, now." He nodded grimly, cradling his broken arm. "Extraction team is 10 minutes out. They'll have the equipment to remove those restraints." The creature's convulsions had become more violent, its form seeming to collapse in on itself as the neurotoxin did its work. But something else was happening too. The symbols on the wall had begun to glow with an eerie blue light, pulsing in rhythm with the creature's death throes. "The gateway," I realized aloud. "It's still trying to complete the ritual. Can it? Even dying? I don't know. This is beyond anything in our records." The pulsing intensified, the air in the chamber becoming thick, charged with something that made my skin crawl and my vision blur. The captives, still in their trance state, began to moan in unison, their vacant eyes now filled with blue light matching the symbols. "We need to disrupt it," I said, searching for anything that might break whatever process was unfolding. "The symbols, they're the key." Understanding immediately, Reeves pulled a phosphorus flare from his tactical vest, igniting it. The harsh chemical light cast grotesque shadows across the chamber, as he began using the burning flare to scorch the symbols on the nearest wall. I followed his lead, using my knife to scrape and deface the symbols I could reach. The blue pulsing faltered, becoming erratic. The creature's screams took on a desperate quality, no longer just pain but rage and frustration. "Others! Coming!" it gasped, its voice barely recognizable now. "Can't stop. Watch me," I growled, continuing to destroy the symbols. A tremor ran through the cave, rocks falling from the ceiling as the ground shook beneath our feet. The captives' moaning reached a crescendo, then stopped abruptly as the blue light faded from their eyes. The creature gave one final, soul-shattering scream before collapsing completely, its form crumbling into a pile of ash-like substance that continued to disintegrate until nothing recognizable remained. The symbols stopped glowing. The tremor subsided. The air cleared, the oppressive charge dissipating like morning fog under sunlight. Reeves and I looked at each other, the same question in both our eyes. Had we stopped it in time? The sound of approaching footsteps answered for us, human footsteps, rhythmic and organized. The extraction team had arrived. "Status?" the team leader asked, taking in the scene with professional detachment. "Entity neutralized," I reported. 6 survivors requiring immediate medical attention. Possible psychic trauma, duration unknown. As the team worked to free the captives from their restraints, I collected samples of the creature's remains for analysis. Something about the way it had disintegrated bothered me. Too convenient, too complete. Most biological organisms, even abnormal ones, left some identifiable remains. "Thinking it might not be over?" Reeves asked, watching me work. It said others were coming, that the process had already begun. He nodded grimly. "I'll have the containment team set up monitoring equipment. If anything tries to come through, we'll know." "And if it does?" Reeves met my gaze steadily. "Then we do what we always do. We hunt it." The extraction team finished freeing the captives, who remained unresponsive but stable. They would be taken to a specialized unit facility for treatment and monitoring. With proper care, they might recover, though the psychological scars would likely remain forever. As dawn approached, we emerged from the cave into the gray light of early morning. Riverbrook lay quiet in the valley below, its residents unaware of how close they had come to an apocalypse beyond imagination. The unit's containment team had established a perimeter around the cave system, setting up equipment to monitor for any unusual energy signatures or disturbances. The cover story was already being implemented, a gas leak requiring temporary evacuation, allowing us to remove the survivors without raising questions. I looked back at the cave entrance one last time before climbing into the transport vehicle. Something told me we hadn't seen the last of whatever species that creature represented. It had been too confident, too certain of its ritual's success, even in death. And those final words lingered in my mind. Others coming, can't stop. A warning, a threat, or a promise. Only time would tell. And when they came, if they came, the unit would be waiting. I would be waiting, because that's what we do. We stand between humanity and the things that hunt in the dark. The things that most people don't believe exist, but they're real, and they're deadly, and I'll keep hunting them until I can't anymore. 3 months after Riverbrook, I found myself in a sterile observation room at the unit's medical facility in Northern Virginia. Through the one-way glass, I watched as Dr. Ainsley conducted her daily session with Mrs. Reed. Of the 6 survivors we'd rescued from the cave, Mrs. Reed had shown the most progress. She was conscious, communicative, and had regained most of her motor functions. The others remained in various states of recovery. Michael West could now respond to simple commands but hadn't spoken. The Aldersons recognized each other, but no one else. Angela Cole remained completely catatonic, and Rick Summers experienced violent seizures whenever the lights dimmed. "Any changes?" Director Wilson asked, entering the room silently, as was his habit. "Dr. Ainsley is trying a new cognitive therapy today," I said. "Something about accessing blocked memories." Wilson nodded, his expression carefully neutral as he observed the session. "Have you experienced any further symptoms?" He was referring to my own lingering effects from the creature's mental intrusion. Headaches, primarily, and dreams so vivid they were difficult to distinguish from memories. Dr. Byrne had found no physical explanation, which was both reassuring and troubling. "Nothing significant," I lied. The truth was more complicated. While the headaches had diminished, the dreams had intensified. Dreams of ancient cities built from materials that shouldn't exist, populated by beings with elongated limbs and eyeless faces. Dreams that felt less like imagination and more like transmitted memories. Wilson studied me carefully, unconvinced. "The containment team at Riverbrook reports no unusual activity for 60 consecutive days. We're scaling back the operation next week, moving to automated monitoring only." "Too soon," I said immediately. "Resource allocation, Morn. We can't maintain a full team indefinitely based on the dying words of an unclassified entity." It wasn't just its words. You read my report. The ritual was almost complete. Whatever it was trying to open was disrupted, Wilson interrupted. "Destroyed, according to your own account." I shook my head. "We interrupted the process. That's not the same as ensuring it can't be completed by something else, or from somewhere else." Wilson sighed, removing his glasses to clean them methodically with a handkerchief, a habit he displayed when frustrated. "The research division has analyzed every sample, every reading, every piece of data from Riverbrook. There's no evidence of any continuing threat." "What about the symbols? Have they made any progress deciphering them?" Dr. Langley's team believes they represent some form of mathematical equation, a complex formula describing a theoretical intersection between dimensional planes. "Theoretical?" "According to our current understanding of physics, yes." Wilson replaced his glasses. "Which means either the entity was attempting something impossible, or it possessed knowledge beyond our scientific understanding. Neither option was comforting. If the creature had been attempting the impossible, its confidence suggested it didn't know that, which meant others might try again, wasting more lives in the process. And if it had knowledge beyond our science, the implications were even more disturbing." "There's something else," Wilson said, his tone shifting slightly. something that wasn't in the official reports. I turned from the observation window, giving him my full attention. The remains you collected? The ash-like substance left when the creature disintegrated. Initial analysis showed no remarkable properties, as you know. I nodded. The lab had classified it as organic matter of unknown origin, but found nothing particularly unusual about its composition. Dr. Byrne decided to run some additional tests last week. She placed a sample in a sealed, sterile environment and left it under observation. Wilson paused. It's growing. Growing? How is that possible? It was completely inert. That's what we'd like to know. The sample has increased in mass by approximately 0.03% over 7 days. Microscopic analysis shows cellular structures that weren't present in the original sample. The implications hit me immediately. It's not dead, or at least not completely. Wilson's expression was grim. Dr. Byrne believes it may be attempting to reconstitute itself on a cellular level. How long until it could pose a threat? At the current rate of growth, years, possibly decades. But that's assuming the rate remains constant, which we can't guarantee. I finished for him. Have you increased security on the sample? Maximum containment protocols, and Dr. Byrne is looking into methods to neutralize it permanently without destroying its research value. I turned back to the observation window, watching as Mrs. Reed struggled to complete a simple puzzle under Dr. Ainsley's patient guidance. These people had survived a nightmare, but none had truly escaped it. The creature's influence lingered in their minds, their bodies, perhaps even their souls if such things existed. And now, knowing that some part of it might still exist, still grow, still work toward whatever ancient purpose had driven it, the weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever. I want to return to Riverbrook, I said finally. One more thorough sweep before the containment team withdraws. Wilson considered this. I can authorize 3 days. Reeves is still on medical leave, so you'll go alone. Reeves's arm had required extensive surgery and rehabilitation. The creature had shattered his bones in multiple places, damage so severe that doctors had initially considered amputation. He was recovering well, but wouldn't be field ready for at least another month. I'll leave tomorrow, I said. Wilson nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. Morn, if you find anything at all, you contact me immediately. No heroics, no solo containment attempts. Understood. After he left, I continued watching Mrs. Reed's session. She had abandoned the puzzle and was now drawing something on a large sheet of paper, her movements increasingly agitated as Dr. Ainsley encouraged her. I moved closer to the glass, trying to see what she was creating. My breath caught as the image took shape, one of the symbols from the cave wall, rendered with perfect precision, despite Mrs. Reed having no conscious memory of her captivity. Dr. Ainsley noticed it too, her professional composure slipping momentarily as she recognized the significance. She quickly replaced Mrs. Reed's drawing paper with a fresh sheet, but the damage was done. Mrs. Reed became increasingly distressed, repeating the symbol on the new paper, then on the table itself when the paper was removed. I pressed the intercom button. Dr. Ainsley, I think you should end the session. She nodded, signaling for the attending nurse to administer a mild sedative. As Mrs. Reed's movements slowed, her distress visibly diminishing, she looked up directly at the observation window, directly at me, though the glass should have prevented her from seeing anything. They're still coming, she said clearly, her voice stronger than I'd heard since her rescue. He showed them the way, through us, through you. Then her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed into the nurse's arms. I was on a plane to Pennsylvania within the hour. Wilson's authorization expedited after I reported the incident. Mrs. Reed had been moved to intensive observation. Her sudden clarity followed by a return to her previous semi-responsive state. Riverbrook looked much as it had when I'd left it 3 months earlier. The town had recovered from the events of those terrifying days with remarkable resilience, aided by the unit's cover story and psychological management techniques. To most residents, the deaths of Sheriff Monroe and Deputy Ross were tragic but straightforward, killed while investigating reported mountain lion sightings. The missing persons had been found, according to official records, though, of course, they remained in the unit's medical facility. New law enforcement had been installed. Sheriff Jenkins and his 2 deputies were actually unit operatives, maintaining watch over the town while the containment team monitored the cave system. I checked in with Jenkins first, receiving updates on the town's status. No unusual incidents, he reported. No missing persons, no livestock kills, no unexplained sightings. The town's back to normal as it gets out here anyway. And the cave system? Containment team has it locked down tight, monitoring equipment covering every entrance we could find, ground-penetrating radar scanning for any changes in the tunnel configuration. Nothing to report. I nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. I'd like to see the main site. Jenkins drove me to the containment team's base camp, a collection of specialized vehicles and temporary structures disguised as a geological survey operation. The team leader, Agent Mercer, greeted me with professional courtesy but obvious skepticism about my concerns. With all due respect, Agent Morn, we've been monitoring this site continuously for 90 days. If anything was going to happen, we would have detected it. I understand, I said, but I'd still like to inspect the primary chamber personally. Mercer sighed but complied, assigning 2 of his team to accompany me into the cave system. The entrance had been secured with a reinforced door disguised to match the natural rock face, accessible only with proper authorization codes. Inside, the tunnels were now well lit with permanent fixtures, the rough floors smooth to allow easier passage of equipment. The changes made the place seem less ominous, but somehow more surreal, like a museum exhibit of something that should have remained wild and unknown. The main chamber where we'd confronted the creature had been transformed completely. The bone arrangements were gone, collected as evidence and replaced by monitoring equipment. The walls had been cleaned, the blood symbols carefully documented and then removed. Nothing remained of the horror that had unfolded here except memories and the lingering sense of wrongness that no amount of scientific equipment could dispel. We've taken readings every 6 hours, one of the agents explained, gesturing to the array of devices positioned around the chamber. Temperature, radiation, electromagnetic fields, atmospheric composition, nothing out of ordinary parameters. I moved to where the symbols had been, running my hand along the now clean rock face. What about this area specifically? The symbols that were here, did they leave any residual energy signature? The agents exchanged glances. We didn't detect anything unusual, but we could run another scan if you'd like. I nodded, continuing my examination of the chamber while they set up their equipment. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint what. The cave was silent except for the hum of machinery and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. Then I realized what was bothering me. When I'd first entered this chamber 3 months ago, it had been filled with bones. Animal and human remains arranged in those disturbing patterns. Even after the unit's thorough cleanup, there should have been some trace of that long-term occupation. Stains in the rock, perhaps, or marks where the creature had altered the natural formation of the cave. But the rock looked pristine, almost as if the chamber had been newly formed. How much physical alteration did the containment team do in here? I asked. Minimal, the agent replied. Standard sterilization procedures, removal of biological material, installation of monitoring equipment. Why? I approached the wall where I'd first seen the symbols, examining it more closely. This rock face, it looks newer than it should. The agent frowned. I'm not sure I follow. Caves this old should show signs of mineral deposits, water erosion, natural aging processes. This looks almost like fresh-cut stone. The agents seemed skeptical, but one brought over a specialized scanner, running it along the wall I'd indicated. He frowned at the readings. That's odd. According to this, the mineral composition of this section differs from the surrounding cave structure. Higher silicon content, traces of elements that shouldn't be here. What elements? He shook his head. I'm not sure. The scanner doesn't recognize them. We'd need to take samples back to the lab. I stepped back, surveying the entire chamber with new eyes. How much of the cave is like this? We'd need to scan the entire system to know for sure. Do it, I said, and I want core samples from multiple depths of these walls. While the agents began the process, I continued examining the chamber, paying particular attention to the area where the creature had died. Something about Mrs. Reed's words kept repeating in my mind. He showed them the way, through us, through you. What if the creature's death hadn't been a failure of its mission, but somehow part of it? What if its disintegration wasn't destruction, but transformation? A change of state from physical to something else? The agents were concentrated on the far side of the chamber, setting up their scanning equipment. I moved to the center of the room, to the exact spot where the creature had collapsed into that ash-like substance. Closing my eyes, I tried to recall every detail of those final moments. The blue light pulsing from the symbols, the tremors in the cave, the captives moaning in unison. A pattern was emerging, but I couldn't quite grasp it, like trying to read a language I'd only glimpsed briefly. On impulse, I placed my palm flat against the floor where the creature had died. The stone felt cool, but not cold, smooth but not polished, ordinary. Yet, as I maintained contact, something shifted in my perception. The headache that had lingered since Riverbrook intensified suddenly, accompanied by flashes of those strange dreams. Alien cities, eyeless beings, mathematical equations beyond human understanding. And beneath it all, a rhythm, a pulse, like a heartbeat, but slower, deeper, reverberating through the stone itself. I snatched my hand away, the sensation vanishing instantly. The agents hadn't noticed my reaction, still focused on their scanning equipment. "Find anything?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. Preliminary scans show similar anomalies throughout approximately 60% of the chamber walls, one reported, all concentrated in areas where the symbols were documented. I approached them, examining the scan results on their equipment. The anomalous areas formed a pattern when viewed together. Not random alterations, but a deliberate design that extended throughout the chamber, possibly beyond into the tunnel system. "I want to see the other chambers," I said. "All of them." We spent hours mapping the entire cave system, taking readings, collecting samples. Each new discovery reinforced my growing suspicion. The cave itself had been changed on a fundamental level. Not just cleaned or altered by the containment team, but transformed from within. The very stone reconstituted into something that appeared natural, but wasn't. By the time we emerged into the fading daylight, I had enough evidence to justify escalating the situation to Director Wilson. I used the secure communication equipment at the base camp to contact him directly. "The cave system has been altered," I reported without preamble. "The preliminary readings suggest the stone itself has been partially transmuted into a substance that mimics natural rock, but contains elements our equipment can't properly identify." Wilson's response was immediate. "How extensive?" "Based on our scans, approximately 60 to 70% of the accessible cave system, concentrated around areas where the symbols were found. And there's something else. I experienced sensations when in direct contact with the altered areas, consistent with the residual effects I've been experiencing since the incident." A long pause. "The sample Dr. Byrne has been monitoring showed increased activity 2 hours ago. Growth rate has accelerated by 15%. The timing aligned with my exploration of the cave. Not a coincidence." "I think they're connected," I said. "The sample, the altered cave, possibly even the survivors, all parts of the same system." "A distributed organism?" Wilson suggested. "Or some form of psychic network. Maybe both. Or something we don't have a classification for yet." Wilson was silent for a moment, considering the implications. "I'm upgrading the situation to Omega-level containment. Full team deployment, maximum security protocols. I want that entire cave system sealed and isolated. Omega-level was reserved for existential threats, situations with potential global implications. In 15 years with the unit, I'd only seen it invoked twice before." "What about the town?" I asked. "Evacuation procedures will commence immediately. We'll use the chemical spill protocol. It allows for rapid removal of civilians without causing national attention." I ended the call and returned to the cave entrance, where the containment team was already implementing enhanced security measures based on my findings. The entrance had been sealed with a specialized barrier designed to block all forms of energy transfer, not just physical access. As twilight deepened into night, I stood watching the activity around me with growing unease. Something told me these precautions, extensive as they were, might already be too late. The creature, or whatever it had become, had 3 months to work its influence. 3 months during which we'd believed the threat neutralized. I returned to Riverbrook one last time as evacuation procedures began. Emergency vehicles lined the main street, unit operatives in hazmat suits directing residents to designated transport. The cover story, a toxic chemical leak from an overturned truck, was being accepted with minimal resistance, the urgency of the situation preventing too many questions. I watched from my SUV as families emerged from their homes carrying hastily packed bags, children clutching toys, elderly residents assisted by neighbors. These people had no idea of the real danger, no concept of what might have been growing beneath their town all these months. As the last transport departed, I drove to the inn where I'd stayed during my original investigation. The building stood empty now, its windows dark, its rooms cleared of occupants. I walked through the silent lobby, remembering Mrs. Reed's efficient management, her suspicious questions about my wildlife management cover story. And now she lay in a hospital bed, her mind fractured, occasionally granting her moments of terrible clarity. "They're still coming," he showed them the way. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, to her private quarters where the creature had taken her 3 months ago. The room had been cleaned and restored by the unit's cleanup team after the incident, all signs of struggle erased. But standing there in the darkness, I could still feel an echo of what had happened, the fear, the violation, the beginning of something that was still unfolding. My satellite phone vibrated. Director Wilson. "Morn," I answered. "Return to base camp immediately," Wilson said, his voice tense. "We're picking up seismic activity centered on the cave system, increasing in intensity." I was already moving, descending the stairs rapidly. "Tremors? Like what happened when the creature died?" "Similar signature, but stronger. And there's more. Dr. Byrne reports the sample has undergone a radical transformation. It's no longer growing. It's changing state. Becoming less solid, more. She describes it as phase shifted. I'm on my way." I could feel the tremors as I drove back toward the containment base. Subtle at first, then strong enough to make the road seem to ripple beneath my tires. The night sky above the forest was clear, stars brilliantly visible in the absence of town lights, now that Riverbrook had been evacuated. The base camp was in controlled chaos when I arrived. Agents moving with urgent purpose, equipment being recalibrated, barriers reinforced. Agent Mercer met me at the perimeter. "It started 20 minutes ago," he said without greeting. "Small tremors at first, registering only on our most sensitive equipment. Now we're looking at seismic activity equivalent to a magnitude 3 earthquake, localized entirely within the cave system. The barrier's holding? So far. But the readings from inside are off the charts. Whatever's happening in there, it's generating energy signatures unlike anything we've recorded before." I followed him to the monitoring station where screens displayed real-time data from the sensors throughout the cave. The numbers meant little to me, but the rapid escalation was clear even to a non-specialist. And the pattern, pulsing, rhythmic, almost like the heartbeat I'd felt when touching the cave floor. "Where's the epicenter?" I asked. An operator pointed to a 3-dimensional model of the cave system. "Here, the main chamber where you confronted the entity." Exactly as I'd feared. "Director Wilson is patching in," someone announced. The main screen switched to show Wilson's face, his expression grave. "Agent Morn, are you seeing this?" "Yes, sir. It's happening faster than I anticipated." Dr. Byrne believes the sample is responding to whatever's occurring in the cave. The containment unit can barely hold it now. It's becoming increasingly energetic, attempting to phase through the barriers. "Sir," Mercer interjected, "request permission to deploy the nuclear containment option." The nuclear option, a last resort protocol involving tactical nuclear devices designed to completely obliterate a threat that couldn't be contained by conventional means. It had never been used in the field, only existed as a theoretical contingency. Wilson hesitated. "The civilian evacuation is still in progress. ETA to minimum safe distance is 47 minutes. "We may not have 47 minutes, I said, watching as the seismic readings continued to escalate. But there might be another option. The creature was attempting to open a gateway, a passage for others of its kind. What if we could reverse the process? Close whatever's opening instead of trying to destroy it. How? Wilson demanded. We barely understand what it was doing, let alone how to reverse it. The symbols, I said. Mrs. Reed reproduced one perfectly, despite having no conscious memory of her captivity. The other survivors might have similar knowledge buried in their minds. If we could access that, understand the complete pattern. There's no time for that kind of research, Mercer argued. This is happening now. He was right. Whatever theoretical solution might exist, we couldn't implement it quickly enough to address the immediate crisis. A sudden spike in the readings drew everyone's attention back to the monitors. The seismic activity had intensified dramatically, now equivalent to a magnitude 4.5 earthquake, and something new had appeared on the energy scanners, a concentration of unknown radiation emanating from the main chamber, growing stronger by the second. Sir, Mercer said urgently, I strongly recommend immediate implementation of nuclear containment. The civilian evacuation zone can be extended if necessary. Wilson's expression was pained but resolute. Proceed with preliminary authorization. Begin countdown at T-minus 20 minutes. Continue evacuation efforts at maximum capacity. The base erupted into even more focused activity as Mercer began the complex authorization sequence for the nuclear option. I stood watching the monitors, feeling strangely detached from the controlled panic around me. Something was nagging at me, a connection I should be making but couldn't quite grasp. Mrs. Reed's words again. He showed them the way, through us, through you, through you. I remembered the creature's mental intrusion, how it had sifted through my memories, my knowledge, and how I had deliberately shown it the most terrifying entities I'd encountered, a defensive tactic that had momentarily distracted it. But what if that exchange hadn't been one way? What if, in that moment of connection, something had passed from the creature to me as well? Not just the headaches and dreams, but information, knowledge it wanted me to have? I closed my eyes, focusing on those dreams that had haunted me for months. Not random nightmares, but messages encrypted in the language of human subconscious. Alien cities built from impossible materials, or mathematical representations of dimensional intersections. Beings with eyeless faces, or symbolic representations of entities that existed beyond conventional perception. The countdown is active, Mercer announced. T-minus 19 minutes 30 seconds. I opened my eyes, sudden clarity washing over me. Stop the countdown. Mercer looked at me like I was insane. On whose authority? Director, I addressed Wilson on the screen. The nuclear option won't work. It might even accelerate the process. Whatever's happening isn't just physical. It's affecting multiple dimensions, multiple states of reality. Explain, Wilson demanded. The creature wasn't just trying to open a doorway for others to come through. It was transforming this location, this cave, into a nexus point between dimensions, a place where the boundaries are thin enough to cross. And how does that make nuclear containment ineffective? Because you can't destroy a dimensional intersection with physical means alone. The energy release might actually provide the final push needed to complete the transformation. Wilson frowned. What alternative do you propose? I took a deep breath. Knowing what I was about to suggest sounded like madness. I need to go back into the cave, alone. Absolutely not, Mercer objected immediately. The creature established a connection with me, I continued, ignoring him. It's been communicating through my dreams, preparing me. I think I know how to close the gateway. But I need to be at the epicenter, in the main chamber. Wilson studied me through the screen, his expression unreadable. This goes against all containment protocols. Yes, sir, but I believe it's our only viable option. A long, tense silence followed as Wilson weighed the alternatives. The seismic readings continued to climb, now approaching magnitude 5. Time was running out. How certain are you? Wilson finally asked. Not certain at all, I admitted. But I'm convinced the nuclear option will fail. This is at least a possibility. Another pause, then, proceed, but the countdown continues as a failsafe. If you haven't succeeded by T-minus 2 minutes, we implement nuclear containment regardless. Understood. Mercer looked like he wanted to object further but followed orders, instructing his team to prepare for my entry into the cave. They equipped me with environmental protection gear, communications, and monitoring devices to track my vital signs and location. "This is suicide," Mercer said bluntly as I prepared to enter. "Probably," I agreed, "but it feels right." The barrier at the cave entrance was temporarily deactivated to allow my passage, then resealed behind me. The tunnel beyond was transformed from when I'd last seen it hours earlier. The walls seemed to pulse with faint blue light, the same color as the symbols had emitted during the creature's death throes. The air felt thick, resistant, as if I were moving through liquid rather than atmosphere. "Comms check," I said, testing the communication system in my protective helmet. "Receiving you," Mercer's voice replied. "T-minus 16 minutes, 45 seconds. I moved as quickly as possible through the tunnels, following the increasingly intense blue glow toward the main chamber. The tremors were much stronger inside the cave, making it difficult to maintain balance at times. Rocks fell from the ceiling, bouncing harmlessly off my protective gear. As I approached the chamber, the blue light grew blindingly bright, pulsing in that now familiar rhythm, like a heartbeat growing stronger, more insistent. The air became even denser, seeming to resist my forward progress, as if the very laws of physics were changing around me. "Status update," Mercer demanded through the comms. "Approaching the main chamber now," I reported. "Extreme environmental changes. The air is different, heavier. The light is almost blinding. Your vital signs are fluctuating wildly, heart rate elevated, brain activity showing unusual patterns." I wasn't surprised. I could feel the changes in my own body. A heightened awareness, senses stretched beyond normal parameters. The headache that had plagued me for months was gone, replaced by a strange clarity, as if veils were being lifted from my perception. I reached the entrance to the main chamber and stopped, momentarily overwhelmed by what I saw. The space had transformed completely. The walls were no longer solid but seemed to ripple and flow, covered in those glowing symbols that now moved and shifted in complex patterns. The floor had become transparent, revealing what looked like an infinite depth below, layers upon layers of realities stacked beneath my feet. And at the center, where the creature had died, a column of blue light stretched from floor to ceiling, pulsing with increasing intensity, its edges becoming less defined with each pulse. "Morn, report. What are you seeing?" Wilson's voice now, joining the communication. I tried to describe the indescribable, knowing my words were inadequate. "The gateway is forming. It's beautiful and terrifying. I can see other places, other realities through it, and something moving within those realities, approaching the intersection point." "T-minus 13 minutes, Mercer reminded me. "Whatever you're going to do it now." I stepped fully into the chamber, feeling the strange physics of the place envelop me completely. Gravity seemed optional here, my movements both heavier and lighter than they should have been. The protective suit registered environmental warnings, radiation of unknown types, atmospheric changes, temporal distortions. I approached the column of light carefully, drawn to it by instinct and the knowledge that had been planted in my dreams. The closer I got, the more I could see through it. Glimpses of landscapes that defied description, architectures that couldn't exist in our reality. Beings moving with that same fluid grace as the creature I had killed. One of them approached the boundary, becoming clearer as it neared the intersection point. Its form was similar to the entity we had encountered, but larger, more complex, with multiple limbs and a face that seemed to exist in several places simultaneously. It recognized me. I could feel its awareness focus, its interest sharpen. "Hunter," it communicated, not in words but in concepts that formed in my mind. "You have come. To stop you," I responded, uncertain if I was speaking aloud or thinking the words. A sensation that might have been amusement rippled through the connection. "No, to complete. Our emissary prepared the way. Through death to transcendence, through you to us." Understanding crashed over me like a physical wave. The creature's death hadn't been a failure. It had been a calculated sacrifice. The final step in a process that had been unfolding for longer than human civilization had existed. Its disintegration hadn't destroyed it. but had transformed it into a distributed consciousness embedded in the cave, in the samples we'd collected, in the survivors' minds, in my mind. T-minus 10 minutes. Mercer's voice seemed distant now, less real than the communication with the entity beyond the gateway. I knew what I had to do. The knowledge had been there all along, planted during that moment of connection with the dying creature. A key turned in a lock I hadn't known existed within me. I removed my protective helmet, ignoring the frantic voices from the communication system. The air in the chamber should have been toxic, unbreathable. But I drew it into my lungs without difficulty. It tasted ancient and new simultaneously, filled with possibilities beyond human comprehension. I approached the column of light until I stood at its very edge, feeling its energy wash over me like waves on a shore. The being on the other side watched with patient anticipation. "You want to come through," I said. "To feed on our world, our fear, our pain. To exist," it corrected. "To reclaim what was once ours. Before your kind, before the great forgetting. This world is ours now. It can be shared, or it can be taken. The choice has always been yours." I understood then. This wasn't the first time this intersection had formed, wasn't the first time humanity had faced this choice. Each time before, the gateway had been closed through destruction, through violence. Nuclear options that had left scars in the collective memory of both species. The creatures had learned, adapted, evolved their approach. This time, they had created a gateway that couldn't be destroyed by force, only redirected, reshaped. T-minus 7 minutes. Mercer's voice, barely audible now through the discarded helmet. I reached toward the column of light, fingers extended. The being on the other side mirrored my movement, its elongated digits approaching the boundary from its reality. We were inches apart, separated by a membrane between worlds that had grown dangerously thin. In that moment, I saw the choice with perfect clarity. I could attempt to seal the gateway using the knowledge the creature had planted in me, a process that would require a sacrifice similar to what the creature had made. My consciousness distributed, embedded in the boundary itself, becoming the wall between worlds. Or I could complete what the creature had started, establish contact, create a permanent bridge between realities. Not an invasion, but a connection, a relationship with a species so alien that communication had been impossible until now. The unit had taught me that anything unknown was a threat, that protection of humanity meant isolation from the wider universe and its dangers. But what if that isolation was itself the greater danger? What if, by always choosing destruction, we had perpetuated a cycle of conflict that spanned millennia? T-minus 5 minutes, came Mercer's increasingly distant voice. The choice before me was impossibly heavy. My training, my years with the unit, everything I'd been taught screamed at me to seal the gateway, to protect humanity from the unknown at any cost. But something deeper, perhaps the understanding placed in my mind by the creature, perhaps my own evolution through this experience, suggested another path. "If I allow this connection," I said to the entity, "what guarantee do I have that your kind won't simply consume our world?" "No guarantee," it replied with brutal honesty. "Only possibility, potential, as with all life." My fingers hovered at the boundary, trembling not with fear, but with the weight of decision. I could feel Wilson, Mercer, the entire unit willing me to close the gateway, to follow protocol, to choose safety over the unknown. But I remembered the creature's words in the inn. "Hunter, you, hunt, I hunt, same." We were predators, yes, but we were also more, capable of choice, capable of growth. T-minus 3 minutes. I made my decision. I plunged my hand into the column of light, not to touch the entity on the other side, but to reach deep into the structure of the gateway itself. The knowledge that had been planted in my mind activated, my consciousness expanding beyond the limitations of my physical form. I could see the gateway now, not as light but as mathematics, as intersecting geometries of reality. The entity recoiled, sensing my intention. "No, after all this time." "I'm not destroying it," I said, my voice echoing strangely as my awareness spread throughout the structure of the intersection. "I'm changing it, using the knowledge given to me, whether as trap or tool no longer mattered. I began to reshape the gateway from within, not closing it completely, not opening it fully, but transforming it into something new. A controlled interface, a regulated boundary that would allow communication without invasion, understanding without conquest. Pain surged through me as my consciousness stretched beyond human limitations. I could feel parts of myself embedding into the structure of the gateway, becoming part of its fundamental nature. I was losing my humanity, piece by piece, but gaining something else, a perspective that spanned realities. T-2 minutes, initiating nuclear countdown finalization. The entity watched me work, its confusion gradually shifting to understanding. A third path, unexpected. That's what we do, I managed to say as my physical form began to dissolve, becoming part of the energy pattern of the gateway. Humans, we find another way. Not destruction, not surrender, coexistence. The entity seemed to consider this acceptable, for now. My transformation accelerated, the boundary between my body and the gateway blurring. I could see Wilson's face on the communicator, horror and fascination warring as he witnessed something beyond unit classification. I could see Mercer's finger hovering over the nuclear authorization. "Abort the countdown," I said, my voice no longer coming from my mouth but from the gateway itself, resonating throughout the cave system. "The threat is contained." "Agent Morn?" Wilson's voice was thick with disbelief. "What have you done? What was necessary? What was possible?" My consciousness was expanding still, touching the minds of the survivors in the unit facility, Mrs. Reed, Michael West, the others. I could feel their trauma beginning to heal as the psychic intrusion that had fragmented them was regulated, controlled. "The gateway is stable," I reported, though I was no longer certain where my voice was coming from, the communicator, the air, the minds of those listening. "It will allow controlled communication but prevent physical crossing. A diplomatic channel, not an invasion route." The entity on the other side studied this new configuration, testing its boundaries. Clever hunter. Neither victory nor defeat for either side. The only sustainable solution. I could feel myself fading now, my identity dissolving into the structure I had created. Not death exactly, but transformation into something no longer fully human. The knowledge I'd been given had come with a price. To reshape the gateway, I had to become part of it. "Agent Morn," Wilson's voice broke through my expanding awareness. "Can you return?" I considered the question, understanding its many layers. Could I return to my human form, to the unit, to the worldview that saw only threats to be eliminated rather than possibilities to be explored? "No," I said finally, "but I will remain watching, guarding the boundary." I could sense Mercer's finger withdrawing from the nuclear authorization, the countdown suspended in the face of this unprecedented development. The tremors had subsided, the cave system stabilizing as the new configuration of the gateway settled into place. "What do we tell the Oversight Committee?" Wilson asked, practical even in the face of the inexplicable. "The truth," I said, though my voice was becoming harder to form as my consciousness diffused further into the gateway structure. "That there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. That protection sometimes means connection, not isolation." The entity on the other side had retreated slightly, gathering others of its kind to observe this new arrangement. I could sense their ancient curiosity, their alien perspective that measured time and geological ages rather than human lifespans. "We will watch," they communicated collectively. "We will wait. We will learn." "As will we," I responded, speaking now for humanity as much as myself. My final transformation was approaching. I could feel the last threads of my human identity unraveling, merging with the energy patterns of the gateway. But before I surrendered completely to this new state of being, I had one last message for Wilson, for the unit, for the world I was leaving behind. "Don't fear what you don't understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper now. "Study it, learn from it, grow beyond what you are." The blue light pulsed one final time, encompassing my physical form completely. When it receded, there was no body left, only the gateway, now a stable, controlled interface between worlds, bearing within its structure the consciousness that had once been Arthur Morn. The unit established a permanent research facility around the cave, studying the gateway and the occasional communications that emerged from it. Mathematical principles, scientific concepts, philosophical questions that challenged human understanding. The town of Riverbrook was never rebuilt, the land designated as a restricted area under military control. The survivors recovered gradually, their traumatic experiences reshaped into something comprehensible by my intervention from within the gateway. They would never be the same, but they found a new kind of normalcy, carrying within them an awareness of realities beyond human perception. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of night, researchers at the facility would hear a voice, neither human nor alien, but something in between, echoing through the gateway. "We are not alone," it would say. "We never were, and that is not a thing to fear, but to embrace." The thing about hunting monsters is that sometimes, when you stare too long into the darkness, you don't find what you expected. Sometimes, you find something that changes your understanding of the universe. And sometimes, you become something new in the process. Neither hunter nor hunted, but guardian of the boundaries between worlds. I am Arthur Morn. I was a man who spent most of his days in the less glamorous shadows of society, chasing things that most people didn't even believe exist. Now I am something else, something more, and I'll keep watching over humanity until I can't anymore. Because that's what we do. We protect what matters, even when the cost is everything. I've been a park ranger at Cascade National Forest for 15 years now. Most people think the job is all scenic views and friendly encounters with hikers, but those of us who've worked these deep woods know better. The wilderness doesn't care about your training or experience. It's an impartial judge that can turn deadly in moments. My post at the North Watchtower sits 30 miles from the nearest town, a wooden structure perched on a ridge overlooking dense pine forest that stretches to the horizon. Cell service is non-existent. Our radio system is reliable but limited. In emergency situations, you're often on your own. That isolation weighs on you over time. The constant wind through the pines creates sounds that your mind transforms, especially during night shifts. Veterans like me develop a sixth sense, an awareness that helps distinguish between natural forest noises and something else. 6 years ago, I encountered something I still can't fully explain. The incident report reads, "Assistance rendered to disoriented hiker." But that clinical description barely scratches the surface of what happened during those 3 days in October. It started with an unusual number of missing hiker reports. 4 separate cases in 2 weeks, all experienced outdoorsmen who knew the area. Search and rescue operations found nothing. No equipment, no distress signals, no bodies. They simply vanished. Local forums buzzed with theories. Some referenced regional folklore about a creature that stalked these woods, tall, powerful, and impossible to track. Most rangers dismissed these stories as campfire tales that distracted from the real dangers: hypothermia, falls, flash floods. I counted myself among the skeptics, until I heard the scream. I was completing my evening perimeter check when it echoed through the valley, a sound I initially registered as human, but with something profoundly wrong about it. Too sustained, too powerful. It reverberated between the mountains like it originated from something with lungs twice the capacity of a man. The radio crackled seconds later. "North Tower, this is dispatch. Did you hear that?" "Affirmative," I responded, already grabbing my gear. "Location estimate?" "Triangulating with South Tower, approximately 2 miles northeast of your position, near Miller's Creek." I documented my departure in the logbook and headed out. Standard protocol dictated waiting for backup, but with darkness approaching and temperatures dropping, every minute counted if someone was injured. The forest grew denser as I followed the narrow trail. October brings early darkness in these mountains, and the setting sun painted long shadows between the trees. My flashlight's beam seemed swallowed by the growing darkness. The first unusual sign came about a mile in, fresh tracks crossing the path. Not human, not bear, not elk. The impressions were deep, suggesting considerable weight, with a stride length exceeding what should be possible for known wildlife in the region. I photographed the tracks and continued, fighting the growing unease. 15 years of wilderness experience had taught me to trust my instincts, and every nerve ending was now signaling danger. As night fully descended, the forest changed character. The comforting sounds of birds and small mammals vanished, replaced by unnatural silence, broken only by the sound of my own movement. Even the persistent mountain wind seemed to hold its breath. Near Miller's Creek, I found the first evidence of human presence, a high-end backpack hanging from a tree branch. Following protocol, I documented its position and examined the contents. Standard hiking gear, a permit issued to one Robert Jenkins, and a journal with increasingly disturbed entries. The final entry read, "It's watching me again tonight, larger than before. The rangers say nothing lives in these woods that can hurt you if you're prepared. They're wrong." That's when I heard the sound of branches breaking nearby. Heavy footsteps approaching my position with deliberate, measured pace. I turned slowly, flashlight raised, heart pounding against my ribs. The beam cut through darkness to reveal nothing, just silent, empty forest. But the footsteps continued, circling my position. Something was there, just beyond where my light could reach, watching, waiting. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, North Tower Ranger requesting immediate backup at Miller's Creek, possible location of missing hiker Jenkins and—" I hesitated, unsure how to describe what I was experiencing. "And unknown wildlife presence," I finished, knowing how it would sound to my colleagues. The radio returned only static. The night passed in tense vigilance. I secured a defensible position with my back against a large boulder, maintained a small fire, and kept my sidearm ready. Whatever circled my camp never showed itself, but the feeling of being watched never subsided. Occasionally, rocks would shift or branches would snap in the darkness, always just beyond my vision. When dawn broke, I found new tracks surrounding my camp in a deliberate pattern. They came within 15 feet of my position from all directions, as if something had been systematically testing my awareness, probing for weakness. With daylight providing better visibility, I resumed searching for Robert Jenkins. The forest seemed different now, threatening where it had once felt familiar. Shadows appeared deeper, the silence more profound. I discovered Jenkins's campsite just before noon. The tent was intact but empty, with no signs of animal disturbance or struggle. His cooking equipment was neatly arranged, a half-prepared meal abandoned. I documented everything and collected his personal effects for identification. While photographing the site, I noticed something odd. Large patches of hair caught on the bark of nearby trees, about 8 feet off the ground. Dark, coarse, and unlike anything from known regional wildlife. I collected samples in evidence bags. The radio finally crackled to life. "North Tower, this is dispatch status report." I detailed my findings, emphasizing the unusual tracks and hair samples. The response was predictably skeptical. "Likely bear activity. Backup arriving in approximately 3 hours. Maintain position." Bear activity. The standard explanation for anything unusual in these woods. But bears don't strategically circle camps. They don't leave methodical tracks. They don't vanish without disturbing supplies or food containers. I decided to extend my search radius while waiting for backup. About half a mile from Jenkins's campsite, the terrain changed dramatically. A steep ravine cutting through the forest floor, its sides slick with moss and morning dew. That's where I found the first body. Not Jenkins, but another missing hiker. Anderson, according to the ID in his wallet. He lay crumpled at the ravine bottom, his equipment scattered. Initial assessment suggested a fall, but closer examination revealed inconsistencies. The body position was wrong for someone who had fallen, and there were those same strange hairs clutched in his rigid fingers. The radio remained stubbornly silent when I tried to report my discovery. Equipment failure is common in these remote areas, but the timing felt deliberate, as if something didn't want me calling for help. As I climbed from the ravine, recording GPS coordinates for the recovery team, I noticed changes in the forest around me. The birds had gone silent again. The hair on my neck stood up, that primal warning system humans have never fully evolved beyond. I wasn't alone. Between two massive pines about 50 yards ahead, something moved. A shadow, substantial and bipedal, watching me with what I could only describe as intelligence. When it realized I'd spotted it, it didn't flee like a startled animal. Instead, it deliberately stepped behind the tree, moving with unsettling purpose. "Forest Service, identify yourself," I called, protocol overriding my instinct to remain silent. The response was immediate and chilling, not words, but a low, rumbling sound that seemed to emanate from the entire forest rather than a single point. It registered more as vibration than noise, something felt in the chest cavity rather than heard. I drew my sidearm and advanced carefully. The rational part of my brain suggested it might be another lost hiker, disoriented and behaving erratically from exposure. The more primal part knew better. As I approached the trees where I'd seen the figure, I found more tracks, fresh, deep, and leading deeper into the untrailed section of forest. Beyond lay the area locals called the Shadow Valley, a depression between mountains where the sun reached for only a few hours each day. Department policy strictly prohibited entering uncharted areas without backup, especially with a potential rescue situation already underway. But Jenkins might still be alive, and whatever left those tracks might lead me to him. I made the call to follow, marking my trail carefully and maintaining regular radio checks, even though I received nothing but static in return. The trail led steadily downward, the forest growing denser until the canopy blocked most daylight, creating a perpetual twilight. The track stopped at the entrance to a natural cave formation, a dark mouth in the hillside partially obscured by fallen trees. Outside its entrance, I found Jenkins's vest, torn and muddied. I documented my position as precisely as possible, then prepared to enter the cave. Standard procedure would be to wait for backup, but if Jenkins was inside and injured, every minute counted. The cave mouth seemed to exhale cold air as I approached, my flashlight beam swallowed by the darkness within. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, calling Jenkins's name. The echo that returned wasn't my voice alone. Something else answered from the depths. The cave extended deeper than my initial assessment suggested, a natural limestone formation with numerous chambers. The main passage narrowed about 50 feet in, requiring me to duck and navigate carefully over uneven ground. My training emphasized the dangers of cave exploration without proper equipment and backup, but I could see clear signs of recent human passage. Scuff marks on the dusty floor, a granola bar wrapper, and more concerning, drag marks, as if something heavy had been pulled deeper into the cavern system. I called out again, my voice dampened by the rock walls around me. "Robert Jenkins, Forest Service, if you can hear me, respond." The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of vacuum that makes your ears strain for any sound. Then, faintly from somewhere ahead, I heard what might have been human, a weak call for help. The passage opened into a larger chamber with ceiling height, allowing me to stand upright again. My flashlight revealed ancient cave formations, stalactites and stalagmites creating a natural maze. The air carried a musty odor overlaid with something metallic and organic that I recognized immediately: blood. In the far corner, partially obscured by a rock formation, I found Jenkins. He was alive but in critical condition, severe dehydration, a compound fracture to his right leg, and multiple lacerations across his torso and arms. His eyes were wild with fear and delirium. When I announced myself as Forest Service, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "It herded me here," he whispered, voice hoarse. "It's smart. It knows these woods better than any of us. It's been watching the rangers for years, learning your protocols." I administered emergency first aid while trying to keep him calm, attributing his statements to trauma and exposure. The injuries were consistent with a serious fall, though some of the lacerations had an unusual pattern, parallel marks that suggested claws rather than sharp rocks. "We need to move," Jenkins insisted, trying to sit up despite his injuries. "It's letting me be found. It's part of the pattern." "What pattern?" I asked, preparing a temporary splint for his leg. 4 hikers every season, for decades. The rangers explain them as accidents, animal attacks, or exposure. But it's the same thing, hunting the same territories. Your department knows. They have to know. His words hit uncomfortably close to our missing persons statistics. We did average 3 to 4 unexplained disappearances annually, clustered in specific areas. Most were eventually classified as misadventure or wildlife encounters. I needed to extract Jenkins immediately. His condition was deteriorating, and the cave system was dangerous even without his claims of being herded here by something intelligent. I established a secure harness system to help transport him, documented his condition with photos, and prepared for the difficult journey back to the entrance. That's when we both heard it. Movement from deeper in the cave system. Heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching from a passage I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a curtain of stalactites. Jenkins began to shake uncontrollably. "It waited until you found me," he whispered. "Now it has both of us." I positioned myself between Jenkins and the sound, sidearm drawn. "Forest Service law enforcement, identify yourself immediately." My voice echoed through the chamber, betraying more confidence than I felt. The footsteps stopped. Then came that sound again, the deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the rock itself. It wasn't merely animal. It carried intention, communication. The cave's acoustics distorted it into something almost like language. Jenkins was openly weeping now. "It mimics, it learns. The old-timers in town called it the Watcher. It's been here since before the park was established." My flashlight caught movement at the hidden passage entrance. Something withdrawing into darkness, a suggestion of mass and height that dwarfed human proportions. The air shifted, carrying an unmistakable musky odor. I fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the gunshot deafening in the enclosed space. "Back off, final warning." The response was immediate, a roar that shook loose dust and small rocks from the ceiling, followed by the sound of rapid movement retreating deeper into the cave system. I needed to move quickly before it potentially circled back. Jenkins couldn't walk, so I would have to half-carry him through the narrow passage to the entrance. Nearly impossible under normal circumstances, but adrenaline provides capabilities beyond normal limits. "We're getting out now," I told him, securing the makeshift harness. "Whatever's back there, we're not waiting for it to return." The journey back through the narrow passage was excruciating. Jenkins bit back screams as his broken leg scraped against rock walls. I maintained constant awareness behind us, convinced that something was pacing us from connecting passages, familiar enough with the cave system to parallel our escape route. Several times I caught glimpses of movement in adjacent openings, never clear enough to identify, but substantial enough to confirm we weren't alone. Jenkins had fallen silent except for his labored breathing, his earlier fear replaced by grim determination to escape. When we finally emerged from the cave, late afternoon light felt blinding after the darkness. I quickly established a defensive position, got Jenkins stabilized, and tried the radio again, this time getting a weak but audible connection to dispatch. "North Tower Ranger with medical emergency. I have located hiker Jenkins, condition critical, requesting immediate extraction at my GPS coordinates." The response was broken but clear enough. "Copy. Helicopter. 30 minutes. Stay in position." 30 minutes. We needed to hold this position for 30 minutes with something potentially hostile in the immediate vicinity. I rechecked my sidearm, established a small perimeter of noise traps using equipment from my pack, and carefully monitored the cave entrance and surrounding forest. Jenkins watched these preparations with knowing eyes. "It won't approach with that helicopter coming. It's too smart for that, but it'll remember you. They say it never forgets a face." "Who says that?" I asked, trying to keep him talking and conscious. "The locals who've been here for generations. They leave offerings at certain trail boundaries, small sacrifices to keep it in its territory. Your ranger station is built on what they used to call safe ground." I'd heard whispers of these practices but dismissed them as harmless superstition. Now, with Jenkins's blood on my hands and the memory of those tracks surrounding my camp, dismissal felt dangerously close to willful ignorance. From the forest edge, 100 yards beyond the cave entrance, came a series of wood knocks, 3 evenly spaced impacts that couldn't be attributed to natural causes. Deliberate communication. Jenkins closed his eyes. "It's marking you. Remember what I said about the pattern." I heard the helicopter before I saw it, the rhythmic thumping echoing across the valley, a sound of civilization and safety cutting through primal fear. As the aircraft approached, a final wood knock sounded from the forest. followed by what I could only interpret as a message. Whatever was out there was leaving, but not retreating. When the rescue team arrived, they found a textbook extraction scenario. Injured hiker stabilized, clear landing zone established, ranger with concise report ready. Everything by the book, except for the unspoken knowledge that something had watched the entire operation from the tree line, something that had orchestrated this encounter from the beginning. The official incident report documented Robert Jenkins's rescue as a successful operation, demonstrating proper wilderness emergency protocols. His injuries were attributed to a fall into the cave system while disoriented after several days without adequate water or food. My performance received a commendation for extraordinary service beyond expected duty. The unusual tracks were labeled as consistent with multiple bear passages, despite expert analysis never being completed. The hair samples disappeared from the evidence locker before reaching the State Wildlife Laboratory. Anderson's body was recovered, his death ruled an accidental fall. I requested access to historical records of disappearances in Cascade National Forest, particularly incidents near the Shadow Valley region. What I found disturbed me more than my experience in the cave. Dating back to the 1930s, when the area was first designated as federal land, the patterns were unmistakable. Every season, 3 to 4 experienced hikers or campers would vanish in clusters around specific territories. The incidents rotated between different sections of the forest on a rough 5-year cycle, as if something was methodically hunting defined territories before moving to the next. More disturbing were the internal memos I discovered from the 1970s, after a particularly aggressive series of disappearances prompted a major search operation. Senior rangers had documented encounters with an unidentified bipedal creature of unusual size and apparent intelligence. They described strategic behavior including territory marking, tool use, and what they believed to be rudimentary communication attempts. The operation was suddenly terminated, the documents classified as internal only, and public explanations pivoted to standard wilderness hazards. Rangers who continued investigating were transferred or encouraged to retire early. I brought my findings to my supervisor, who listened with uncomfortable attention before closing her office door. Every ranger with significant time in these woods has a story they can't explain, she said quietly. We document what we can verify. We protect the public by teaching them real wilderness safety. And we respect that there are some things in these mountains older than our understanding. People are dying, I countered. People have always died in wilderness. We can't stop that. But we can maintain the boundaries. What boundaries? She wouldn't elaborate further, but directed me to speak with the maintenance chief, a man who'd worked in the forest for over 40 years. He explained the real purpose behind certain trail closures, lookout positions, and ranger patrol routes. They weren't just for visitor safety or environmental protection, but formed a perimeter around traditional territories. The old ranger director back in the 80s worked out an understanding, he told me. We don't push into certain areas, especially during specific seasons. We mark our boundaries clearly in ways it understands. In return, incidents stay manageable. Manageable? The word tasted bitter. People still disappear. He nodded grimly. Fewer than before. And it's selective. Only those who cross certain boundaries despite warnings. Only those who camp alone in specific regions. We can't publicize the real reasons without causing panic or attracting thrill seekers looking to find it. 6 months after Jenkins's rescue, I received a transfer request to the Eastern Station, the furthest position from Shadow Valley. The paperwork cited diversification of experience as the reason, but the message was clear. I'd seen too much, asked too many questions. Jenkins recovered physically, but refused to ever camp again. His official statement described getting lost and falling, with no mention of being herded or stalked. When I visited him during his recovery, he seemed different, subdued and careful with his words. Do you remember what you told me in the cave? I asked him. About the pattern? He looked at me with hollow eyes. I remember telling you what saved my life, that I fell and you found me. That's all that happened out there. But as I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm just as he had in the cave. 4 people every season, he whispered. Don't make yourself one of them. I accepted the transfer. I still work as a ranger, still love the wilderness despite what I experienced. But I've changed my approach to the job. I enforce trail closures with particular vigilance. I discourage solo hiking in certain areas with greater urgency. And I pay special attention to the missing persons reports, tracking the patterns that most of my colleagues attribute to coincidence. The forests hold secrets older than our national parks, older than our understanding of wildlife biology. As rangers, we stand at the boundary between civilization and wilderness, between known and unknown. We document what we can explain and sometimes protect people from truths they aren't prepared to accept. I still hear those wood knocks in my dreams. 3 perfect beats that weren't communication meant for Jenkins or other prey. They were meant for me. A message that our supposed stewardship of these lands is merely tolerated by something that was here long before us and will remain long after we're gone. When hikers ask me about staying safe in the backcountry, I give them the standard advice. Carry proper supplies, follow trails, inform others of your route, but I also tell them to listen to the forest. If the birds go silent, if you feel watched, if something about a perfect campsite feels wrong despite no logical reason, trust that instinct. It's the oldest warning system we have, developed through thousands of years of being prey before we became predators. Some boundaries aren't marked on any trail map. Some dangers can't be explained in any guidebook. And some stories can't be fully told, even by those of us sworn to protect both the wilderness and those who venture into it. Sometimes protection means silence, and sometimes the deepest respect we can show the wilderness is fear.